KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dagan, the separatist pirate Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you today, my friend?
Rolling up the old sleeves. We got a good one, an iconic one for you, my friend. Everything's good. I just realized I told you I'm going to be a little late. I was rendering like a motion graphics reel, a new reel last night, and I left the computer on, so it was like, I don't know what I was doing. Yeah, the comp was on all night last night, rendering like some, I don't know, 30 gig file or something. So,
and this is for your job hunt, I assume?
This is for the job hunt. Did a little motion graphics reel. In fact, one of the iterations of the Constellation opening animation is on that reel. I don't think it's the one we ended up going with because I did like 3 or 4 different versions. So that's kind of exciting. A little cool, LSM man. Is represented in that. Yeah, man, just kind of zigging and zagging career-wise. You know, it's so funny though, dude. Like I take out computer hard drives, especially desktop PCs, so quick. Like the longevity of my computers is probably half of a normal person's, just because the files I work on are so huge, I think, that you can't even like, what is it called when you basically take apart the hard drive and clean everything
defrag
up.
it or whatever?
Yeah, like defrag. Yeah. I can't even, it's like beyond defragging. Like a year in, I already know, like, let's just keep driving this thing into the ground. Maybe I'll have it for 3 years.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I've defragged a drive in probably 15 years. Because that used to be a thing where you would do it because you needed more space.
Exactly.
And I don't need space now. I have like hundreds of gigabytes.
Yeah, things have changed for sure since the old compact.
Dude, I think
PC
about
days.
My Sony Vaio that I bought. Well, I didn't buy it. Mom bought it in 1996. That was the first computer we hooked up to the internet.
Wow.
And I had Napster and stuff on it. It had 1.2 gigs of that would have been awesome, of hard drive space, which was insane. So limited. And
that's insane.
And you would download songs and you'd have to like delete other songs because you couldn't keep doing it. But
well, it's good like a 3-minute After Effects file for me now. You know what I mean? Like a smaller After Effects file.
Things have changed. Let's say.
Certainly.
Well, today, as everyone knows, because they already clicked on this, it's KnockBack, all about Uncharted 4, the 2016 game. Now, our rule typically is to go 10 years or further back. However, we really instituted that to stop you guys from voting for topics that were brand new. We're not doing fan votes anymore for KnockBack, and we're just kind of rolling these out twice a month now. So without that interactivity, I feel like we're much safer to go and just do whatever we want.
I love it.
And
I love this.
Yeah, so Uncharted 4 is not that old, but it's a game that people have wanted us to cover. And because we did the first 3 Uncharted games already from 2007, 2009, and 2011 on PS3, we figured we'd advance to the PS4 version. Some people consider this the best one, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. I played it on PS5 with the Legacy of Thieves collection, and I beat it, I don't know, last week or something like that. But I had played it when it came out, and I wanted to say I was really excited to get this, and I'll throw it over to you. I wanted to get to this for one reason. I feel like Uncharted 4: A Thief's End is emblematic of what it was like for me working, and I think what it was like for a lot of people working in the games industry at the time and in the media. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was getting, and I know this sounds crazy, but I was getting so many codes and so many games, and I had to play so many games, and we were rushing through them. And I totally rushed through Uncharted 4. I mean, I'll admit that 100%. The first time I played it, I was like, I had Greg breathing down my neck to do the spoiler cast and do all these things, and we got the game really early. And I'm like, I remember just being like, fine, fuck this game. I just want to be done with it, so everyone will shut up and leave me alone. And so I liked it at the time, but I don't think I really got the most out of it. So this time around, I went out of my way to make sure I had maximal time to play it. Usually I try to give myself a little bit of a time crunch when we do these things because it keeps me honest. It's like, you got to play 4 hours a day for 5 days or something. But with this, I was like, I'm going to give myself like 2 weeks, and I'm just going to play it very leisurely. And I did that, and I ended up liking it a lot more the second time through. Do I think it's the best Uncharted game? I don't know. I don't know. I think it gets a little too crazy, actually.
Okay.
And I have this weird, I want to throw it over to you with this weird idea I had, or this weird notion I had, especially playing it on PS5. Did you play it on PS4 or PS5?
I played it on 5.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I ask you this because I'm like, it almost looks too good for the kind of game it is.
Sure.
And it almost begs, and I know this is weird, like almost going into a stylized direction. Like if Drake and Sam and all these people are jumping around and killing people and platforming and doing all this amazing, he's like the world's strongest man, the world's greatest mass murderer, all these things at once. And we've joked about that in the past, but I think the game, if anything, the game only suffers from that one thing, which is it just looks too good. Like, so when Drake is jumping around and climbing and it's like, this is insanity. It looks ridiculous.
That. Sure.
But pound for pound, it's a very good game with really appealing characters, an awesome story. I think the second half of the game is substantially better than the first half of the game. I think that if it was that strong the entire time, I think the game would be, in my mind, a classic. I don't think it's that. I think Uncharted 3 is still my favorite Uncharted game.
Okay.
3 is but awesome. But I love this game. I thought it was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I finally got to go back to it and enjoy it again. And it's a nice segue for us to get into the Lost Legacy as well, which is the DLC, right? With Nadine and Chloe.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we'll do that in the future. But let's stop there for now and hear what you think about, your high level thoughts on Uncharted 4, A Thief's End.
I mean, listen, I'm thrilled. My gaming bona fides have grown by one. Another one, another notch in the old video gaming belt for the Dagster. I'm thrilled going into this. I love what you said too, just starting out. Like, you can play this game at a rapid clip if you want to, or you can really slow down and wring all the juice out of it. It kind of works both ways. It's kind of a special and magical game in that way. Even more so, I would say, than the initial 3 iterations, because this one's much larger. They really pushed out the boundaries. You could explore more. You could even get a little lost in this game, which was a kind of a cool experience. Listen, I had so much fun. I went in completely unspoiled. I can't wait to get into rankings with you, or at least kind of reveal which one is our favorite now that we've got all 4 completed. But I didn't even want to go in and see what the experts were saying ranking wise. I just wanted to go in unfettered and just kind of pure and experience it for myself. And, there's a lot of things to celebrate here. Our beloved heroes return. There's a new hero or two to meet. We have the thrilling set pieces we've come to expect, right? The frantic action, the globe-trotting Indiana Jones-esque adventure. We have characters we actually care about, characters you could actually root for, which I think is so cool about this series. Maybe even more so in this game. Everything's constructed upon a foundation of emotion and story. You have the Michael Bay levels of pulse-pounding action, but it's the characters and the stories and the interactions and the relationships that really kind of keep you there. Some white knuckle platforming, which I was happy to see, and some inventive new mechanics. They're not just resting on their laurels here and cashing in. There's some new stuff to explore. I think it's more fluid than ever, I would argue. Really wonderful gameplay. I think it's expertly crafted and paced. I think Uncharted is kind of a masterclass in pacing in general, but I love that. I love the variety. So, and I was really pleased. And listen, Nathan Drake, for me, he's become like a hero up there, or a character. I don't want to say a cartoon character, but just a character of fiction up there along with all the greats. Like, I think of him almost like an indie now. He's got that Fred Flintstone familiarity for me now, where it's like, yeah, this guy's like a household name for me now. I care about this guy. And kind of a timely episode for us too, Kyle, because didn't Mr. Druckmann and company in Last Stand Media, again, I don't think we go an episode without mentioning this guy lately, but he just recently revealed that it looks like Naughty Dog is done with Uncharted and there's no plans to go further.
Yes. And that, we talked about this a bit on Sacred Symbols. Sony's very organized, and that was intentional, I think, because, and I don't know if you saw it, but we discussed this in depth, is that they are blatantly teasing the next Uncharted game in a live action ad that they put out maybe 3 or 4 days before we started filming. And what it basically is like a news sequence showing all these different live action shots of God of War and Horizon and all of this, but there are 2 shots in it that are not of games we've ever heard of before or seen before. And one of them is like what looks like a 20-something-year-old girl in a cave with a torch walking through a cave. And then another one is her like leaning over and blowing the dust off of like an artifact.
Is it her?
So people are thinking that it's either Cassie from the end, and we'll talk about that, or it could be a prequel with Cassandra Morgan, Nate's and Sam's mom.
Holy shit.
But either way, it's clear that Uncharted is going to continue. And I mean, it's blatant as the day is long. Sony, because it's so funny. People were not, people were like, oh, maybe it's something else. Maybe I'm like, guys, I've done this for so long. Like nothing is an accident with them. Nothing is an accident. And when it is, they freak out. I'll give you an example. In a Last of Us like post-release video that they put out from Naughty Dog, I went in at IGN and zoomed in on images on computers, and I was finding out that they were making Uncharted stuff in the background. Oh. And Naughty Dog was like, "Where did you get this?" And I'm like, "From your own videos." Yeah, and
Super sleuth.
And so I feel like since then, and it was like dead to rights. People can go read about it on IGN and all that. And that was before Uncharted was announced, which was announced, I think, the day PS4 came out. This game. Okay. And that was when Amy Hennig was still doing it with Justin Richmond, who was the director of the third one. And he was going to direct this one as well, and did direct it for a little while. Yeah. So I see all of this, and I look and I just wonder, there's no mystery about who, in my opinion, what's being shown in that trailer. And Naughty Dog coming out and saying we're not doing it is simply them acknowledging that they're not making it. Now there is another Uncharted game that wasn't made by them, of course, Golden Abyss, that's on Vita. That was made by Bend, the guys that did Days Gone and Siphon Filter.
Okay.
And there's a lot of assumptions. So there's 2 possibilities here, I think. The game's real. I mean, there's no doubt. And last fall, someone was hired saying like they are dealing with the, kind of the heritage of Uncharted and all this, like kind of managing that franchise at Sony. So my assumption is that this is being made by a different team, likely the visual arts team out of San Diego, although we don't know yet. And so yeah, you should go watch that when you can. And that was what made this so timely, because we decided to do this before that trailer came out.
Sure. Yeah.
And so the trailer shows, Aloy and Kratos, and it shows Gran Turismo, and it shows MLB The Show, and it shows everything except for those 2 shots. No one knows what those 2 are.
That is that's compelling news. I mean, listen, this wasn't on purpose. I cut it really down to the wire this time, actually in a good way, because it's really fresh in my mind. But I just rolled credits on the game this morning, a few hours ago. And I have to say, looking at the ending and everything that happens, and we'll get there, we'll talk about it, I was really disappointed to know, because I immediately have a story in my head, of course, who it should center around. And the, sort of a mentor protege thing going on, even if we're leaving Nate out. I have an awesome idea. And if they're doing something even similar to that, I don't know how I feel about Naughty Dog not being involved, but that's still exciting, because, you hate to see a good thing die, right? That's just human nature. We love something. We don't want to jump the shark, but we want more. So how do we walk that fine line? So that's interesting news. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the footage for you so you can see. Yeah, and then if you go forward, there's like another one with her blowing it off.
I saw it. That was really quick. Oh my God, you guys. Yeah, that's exciting. That is super. But I'm thrilled to
we cut just so Dagan can see the trailer and actually have a little idea of what I was talking about.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's all we know, but I think it's pretty clear. And we'll get to the epilogue towards the end. It's so good. It's so wonderful. And exciting, and a good way to set everything up. But let's go back to the beginning. I actually want to talk a little bit about the development of the game, just because I think it's important. And veterans of Sacred Symbols, which will be most people listening to this, already know this in full detail, because I've talked about it many times. But just to kind of set the stage, because we're talking about this game specifically, Uncharted 4 was supposed to be a different game. And what basically ended up happening was when Amy Hennig and Justin Richmond left Naughty Dog in 2014 under mysterious circumstances. Now, I'll tell you, I know this is funny, because Naughty Dog was really mad at our reporting about this at IGN, because we broke the story. I actually had nothing to do with it. It was Mitch Dyer who actually broke the story at IGN, that Amy Hennig was removed from Naughty Dog, and they totally dispute that. However, I know who the sources are for that story, and I 100% believe it. I'm not ever going to tell anyone who the sources are, but but I know I was in the room when we were going over the story and writing it and publishing it and dealing with Sony, and so it wasn't good what happened, and it was unexpected to a lot of people, and so people will remember at IGN in 2013, I wrote The History of Naughty Dog, which was a 5-part series that I wrote. I actually never finished the 5th part. I found all the transcriptions actually recently, and I think I'm going to use them to finish the story at some point, maybe in a video. But at that time, I talked with everyone at the studio. I talked to 20-something people for the story, and one of them obviously was Amy Hennig, who was, I was very friendly with by this point. She trusted me, and so she would welcome me into her office, and I've said in the past her office was this big room just full of books. It was really quite insane. It was almost like a professor's office, and she also had like a TV with like a VCR and DVD player and like all of these DVDs and VCRs. She was just a constant study, and on the wall in her office, actually it was outside of her office, so it was facing the cubicles. It was the full timeline of Uncharted 4, which at that point had not been announced yet. And she just said, please don't write about this. And I said, okay, but I read what was there. And what was there were they were huge like index cards at the top with like 14 or 15 chapters. And then all the things that happened underneath it. And you better believe I was reading them. And I remember some of it, and I won't say what some of it was. I don't think it's my place to say, but it's different. And what's the same are the places. And so what you can glean from this is that they came in. So here's my theory on what happened with Uncharted 4. Amy Hennig is really exacting and very specific about things.
Sounds like it.
Remember, Drake's Fortune came out in 2007, Among Thieves 2009, Drake's Deception 2011. This is quick. I have no idea how they made the games that quickly. I really have no clue. I have no clue. 2 years.
Insane.
These days, 3 years is considered quick. Like Star Wars Jedi Survivor was made in 3 years, the sequel to Fallen Order, and that's incredible. But that's probably a 150 million plus game, and a talented studio, Respawn. So it's very uncommon. And even back then, it was very uncommon to make games this quick.
Sure.
And I don't know if it was because they had expectations that it was going to continue to be that quick. I'm not entirely sure they were having an easy time with PS4 at that studio, which is one of the reasons why they put out Last of Us Remastered, was to learn it. And a very similar thing that they did with The Last of Us Part 1 with PS5 to learn the console again. I think this is something that they're trying to do.
Smart.
And so ultimately, the game was announced in 2013. Now, in November of 2013, and people will remember, Amy Hennig announced it herself. It was just called Uncharted at the time. There was just the Uncharted logo. And then it was not even 6 months later that she was removed, along with Justin Richmond, Todd Stashwick, I think, left. And so what I think happened is that she was either taking too long or not kind of shitting and getting off the pot. I have a very hard time believing it wasn't going to be good. I think that what they were like, we need to get going. So The Last of Us, Neil and Bruce came in. This was not the game they wanted to make, nor did they choose to make it. I don't think really. I think they kind of had to. They came in and directed this thing, and they finished it. And so when I see things like Scotland, I'm like, that's funny because in the original game, Scotland, I think, was the first place you go. Like that was like chapter 1. And you start to kind of think about where they were supposed to be and what was supposed to happen and why they were there. And the reason, of course, that they reused all these places is because the team was already building all of them.
Yeah.
So so what I imagine happened was like, listen, these are the locations we're building. And these are the gameplay mechanics and kind of the beats. And we got to write a story about this. I don't know if the story about Avery and Libertalia is the story that Hennig was working on. I don't think so, though. I don't remember seeing that stuff in the things I read. So that's kind of where it came from. And that's why there was a 5-year distance, not quite 5, but about 5 years between Uncharted 3 and Uncharted 4. But even then, I think that it's a pretty extraordinary thing. It's very bad when a director leaves a game. Usually the game gets canceled or the game gets fucked up, or you have a game like Final Fantasy 12 where it's clearly 2 games patched together based on who was making what and all of that. But somehow they managed to make this work. And I think it was Bruce Straley's final game with Naughty Dog 2. And actually, I think his final game at all.
Oh, wow. He never landed anywhere else?
Well, he's working at he wrote a game, an indie game, and then I think he landed at like a new studio now. But there's like a lot of beef with him and Naughty Dog, apparently. Like it's kind of becoming more and more open because he gave an interview to the LA Times when The Last of Us came to HBO saying like, I'm not even credited in this. Wow. Like I didn't make any money. I don't, and we need to figure this out because it's not really fair. Because he doesn't have writing credits, but he had a major hand in The Last of Us.
That's
in terms
interesting.
Of its pacing and its gameplay and its world.
Sure. So you want to have somebody like that. Yeah. You want to give them their flowers. Kyle, the other thing I heard about Naughty Dog, I just read about this. I never knew that it was a pretty daunting production, Uncharted 4. And like 70% of the senior staff left after the game. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, a little bit.
I really think there are two things that happen at studios when you work at a place like Naughty Dog. You working on Naughty Dog games, first of all, bonuses are huge, probably in the six figures for a lot of senior staff.
Absolutely.
Right? The games Uncharted 4 sold 20 million copies or more.
Wow. Shit.
So, which is like $1.5 billion in revenue.
Okay.
So, because I did the math, God of War Ragnarok sold 11 million. That's about $750 million conservatively in revenue, probably 3 times its budget. So what I'm saying here is that, yeah, there was turnover, but I think it's very similar to what happened at Guerrilla after Killzone, which was, I think people go to places to make specific games. And when studios are moving on to other kinds of games, I'm not sure that they want to work on them, but I think the Naughty Dog thing is really important because when you have Naughty Dog when you worked on Uncharted or The Last of Us, that's fucking huge. I mean, that's writing your own ticket to basically any studio you want to go.
Sure.
And so I think people take advantage of that too. People make very questionable decisions about where they go. I mean, Shannon Studstill, who ran Sony Santa Monica for a long time, left to go to fucking Google Stadia. I mean, that was a disastrous decision. Oof. But I mean, can you imagine how much money they probably paid her? I mean, can you really blame her? So so that's what I'm saying. I think that when you work on big games, I think it's hard to stay put because you become much more expensive, to keep. And others are willing to pay for your expertise.
It's a great point.
So I think that has a lot to do with it.
I think that's probably a big part. And you know what? When visionaries like Hennig and, that type of person leaves to those linchpin characters, those creators, I think they probably take people with them too. And I'm not saying they poach. I'm saying people go with them. That they become like a package deal. The visionary and the various underlings, whether it's animators or it could be anything, copywriters, designers, all those things. So they become like, and again, it's not a poaching thing. It's just going where you become like this cohesive unit. You become a family. You become really a proper family. I know how that is on the animation side. Yeah. Well,
just to throw in real quick, I mean, you see it all the time. In Infinity Ward, the guys that made Call of Duty, that studio still exists. And they're still great, but Jason West and Vince Zampella that founded that studio founded Respawn, and then that studio was bought by EA. They made Titanfall and Apex Legends, but a bunch of people that work on those games worked on the first 3 Call of Duty games.
There you go. Yeah,
so that's exactly so it happens. That's exactly
sure,
what.
Of course.
So go on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's it. I mean, I've seen that happen, and I can imagine. And like you said, it is interesting because when a project is being steered by one overarching visionary or creative, and it's really their flavor, it's their baby. When somebody walks off that production, be it a film, a live action film, an animated film, a TV series, a video game, whatever, that glue is sort of eroded then. So it is hard to continue. I've seen that. I've followed that closely with various productions over the years at places like Pixar. And then it becomes kind of twice the job to make it a cohesive product. And, I have to say, I'm fresh off this game. I don't feel like it was, I didn't feel like it was a hodgepodge or like it was stuck together with spit and glue. I felt like it was a pretty cohesive thing. I would have never known the backstory, vis-a-vis the final product. So I guess it was a success.
Yeah. And I mean, Amy leaving definitely cost some people. And Justin Richmond was tied to the waist with Hennig since Uncharted 3. He ended up going to Riot, I want to say, which are the guys that do League of Legends. Todd Stashwick was helping to write stuff. He's an actor. He was in 12 Monkeys and some other stuff, but
oh, sure.
He left definitely as a result of Amy leaving and stuff. And I think they actually collaborated on some of the stuff that ended up becoming Forspoken, which is a pretty dubious Luminous Productions game from Square Enix that just came out. But let's get into the game itself as we get it. Let me ask you this at the very top. This is such a Colin reference. I'm sorry. Everyone's going to roll their eyes, but Uncharted 4 reminds me of Mega Man. And I'm going to explain to you why. It doesn't remind me of a specific Mega Man franchise. It reminds me of the franchise's arc.
Okay.
But it reminds me of what Mega Man did, and it happens all in one game. So here's what I mean.
Okay.
Mega Man 1, right? Mega Man can't duck, shoot, no fire, boss weapons. Mega Man 2, it introduces Rush, but it's not Rush yet. It's the items, all of that. Mega Man 3 introduces Rush and the slide. Mega Man 4 introduces the power shot, right? And so on and so on and so on.
Sure.
Uncharted kind of plays the same in the first 3 games. And then in the next game, it gets crazy. And it's specifically, and I wanted to make sure, it's like the sliding, the rope slinging, and all of the rest. And I would say destructible environments is another big addition too, and we can talk a little bit more about that, because that's based on the PS4's power. I mean, because games have to remember that when that happens. That's why environments don't get destroyed, is because it's difficult. That's why games like Red Faction and others were famous for doing that, and Black on PS2, if people remember that game. But to me, this is like Mega Man 3, 4, and like 2, 3, and 4 all smushed together, because they introduce, it would be cool to go back and say like, all right, Uncharted 2 introduced the slide. Uncharted 3 introduced the swing and all of these, and it culminates. But actually, Uncharted 4 plays so radically different that I do remember at the time thinking, why wasn't Drake doing any of this in the previous games? Right? He's like going nuts. Not only is he a world-class mountain climber, but now he's swinging around like a fucking, like he's in Barnum and Bailey circus, you know? So I wrote down Mega Man in my notes, and then when I was going through them to type them up, because it's just easier for me to read them, I'm like, what the fuck was I talking about, Mega Man? And then I remember realizing, like, oh, right. How do you feel about that reference? That's what Uncharted 4 kind of feels like to me from a gameplay.
I love that. That's why you tune into Last Stand Media stuff, for those Colin takes. Yeah. So what you're saying is Uncharted 4 is Naughty Dog's Mega Man 3. That's basically what it is. That's where everything starts to change. You know what I love about it, though, Kyle? You have a successful franchise in Uncharted 1 through 3. Super successful. People are waiting with bated breath for the next one. So I love the courage of for two reasons. I love the courage of taking it and expanding it and making it different. And you got to be careful, because a lot of people don't think it's broken and you're fixing it. You got to be careful with that. But I love the courage behind that. But I also love just not resting on your laurels. How can we make this better, especially with the advent of a powerful machine like the PS4 now? Let's push out the limits. Let's see what we could do. Let's explore. Let's make it better. And yeah, like you said, you have the rope/grappling hook. You have the climbing spike, which I thought was kind of a subtle and nuanced,
that's another one.
But very cool mechanic. Mm-hmm. And you have the sliding, and the sliding is a direct. It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I wasn't thinking about sliding until this morning for some reason, writing the notes, new mechanics. And then, of course, you think slide, you think Mega Man 3, because that's when you took a iconic franchise. With Capcom, it was Mega Man 2. Everybody loved it. I mean, it was like, it's still one of the greatest video games of all time. And then Capcom said, we're going to change it. And a lot of people love it, and a lot of people still hate it. I was just listening to 2 people talk about how much they hated Mega Man changing in the early 90s.
Get fucked.
I love it. I mean, it's so good.
The power shot is, I think, a step too far, but the slide, I think, I like the power shot, but it makes it so that you're always holding the B button down, right? Like, why wouldn't you just always hold it down? So it almost breaks the rhythm of the gameplay, but the sliding to me is...
I never thought of it that way. Yeah. So very, very interesting.
I'm a scholar of Mega Man. There's nothing I've not thought of. Trust me.
Thank you for drawing that parallel. Very special.
Yeah, thank you. And good call on the spike too. Like, they introduced that and then they kind of don't use it again for a while.
Yeah,
I noticed too, because when I went, there was a part of the game where I'm like, "What the fuck do you want me to do?" And then and I was like,
"I thought I was soft locked." I was like, "I can't believe I'm soft locked in a Naughty Dog game. Is this really happening right now?" It happened to me twice actually in the game. I'll talk about the other one later if I remember. But yeah, that climbing spike, they make sure you use it, and that's that's the thoughtfulness. That's the crafting of like making sure you employ something and then actually thoughtfully use it in the game. You're not going to get by unless you know how to do this. That's game design, baby.
Totally. And it reminds me of when the game was first shown gameplay. I think it was PSX 2014 in December that year. Bruce Straley on stage playing it. I mean, back in the day when people would play their games live, which is so awesome. I love that kind of stuff that never happens anymore. And he fell through the environment, and and everyone started clapping. Like, because I think people were like, this is awesome. Like, it's ballsy. Like, you're not just sitting there with a controller in your hand. Like, it's really, the game just failed and they had to reboot. And I remember people flipping out because I remember what the scene was. It's in one of the scenes in the jungle when you're swinging around and you're stealthily going. That's another thing. Yeah. Although stealth's introduced in Uncharted 2, it is much bigger here.
Yes.
And you're sneaking around like this jungle area, jumping from like platform to platform and swinging around. And Bruce was like swinging around, just murdering the dudes in that place. And people were like freaking out. That's awesome. Like, what the fuck? And I was freaking out. And so I really dig it. And you know what I dig too, and we'll get into the plot here in a sec, but I dig also that the game there's not that much gunplay. I remember saying that the first time through, like, you don't play it that much. There's a lot of gunplay at certain specific areas, but then the game just kind of chills.
Yes.
There's a great balance and rhythm to the game that Absolutely. I think deserves a lot of credit too, especially because it's long. All right, let's go to the beginning of the game. We start on a boat. First of all, reference to the first game, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I automatically thought that. I got kind of lost along the way. I really wish, as part of this conversation, I went back and was able to revisit at least partially the first three, because I'm still a little turned around as to which is which. But yeah, I think there's a lot of nods to previous Uncharted games throughout this game. But that's this opening scene, this cold opening with the boat running from the pirates in the storm at night on the boat. Like, yeah, I think that's a direct nod.
Do you like that Uncharted game start like this, by the way?
I love it. Oh, I love it, dude. Jump right into the action. We talked about this in the Last of Us conversation recently, where in anything, TV series, movies, I love the cold opening. I love jumping right in and then backpedaling. And I love the way Uncharted sort of works backwards into what it's showing you. You know, it shows you something and then it's got to work up to that point. I guess it's really essentially working forwards. But I love that. Yeah, show us a piece of something a little cryptically, be a little obtuse about it, a little vague, and then we'll get a better understanding later. But jumping right into the action is always smart because it's compelling. It's a great formula.
So we start on this boat. It's getting crazy. We'll see this part later in the game, but then we backtrack to Kid Drake. Now I'm curious how you felt about going back to this. We see Drake at a different age and a different place now. This is earlier than we see him in Uncharted 3, I think.
Right.
Because by that point, he's already like out on his own, being called Drake and living a life of crime, basically.
Exactly.
Which
I'm
really
happy they
doing.
Went back to Kid Drake.
Yeah, so you were happy to see that. And how did you feel about the inclusion of a brother in Sam?
I love another dynamic. We already love the Nate Sully thing. We already love the protege mentor thing. So why not listen, Nate's a great character. We care about him. So give us some texture, give us some kind of meaning, some story, some depth into his life. And what better way to do it than with a brother figure, sort of another mentor, but a closer in age, but also a different kind of mentor. Maybe a mentor that's not always good for Nate, that kind of create that relationship, that love, but that there's something a little broken in the relationship too. There's something that's maybe a little dangerous about the relationship, even though that love exists. Again, just kind of planting everything. You have this globe-trotting archaeological adventure thing, but kind of the underpinning is very emotional, and it's about story and it's about relationships, and it's about why we care about the characters and we go along for the ride, right? Because and getting another Drake and another character with a different personality and somebody else to root for, and somebody in Sam that I think you're a little suspicious of, and you're a little worried about Nate because of Sam too. You're rooting for the duo, but you're hoping that Sam's on the up and up. So it gives the story that dynamic too, and that tension.
Yeah, it's funny. I have this weird feeling on Sam. Troy Baker, of course, and this is during the rise and ubiquity of Troy Baker. It's just too much. Troy Baker.
Good, dude.
He is good, but it's just too much of it. Nolan North was the same thing, and they backed off on him a lot too. And they were really good friends, but I think they must have had some sort of falling out or something.
Oh, you mentioned this before because they do a podcast or did a podcast.
They did something called Retro retro something, I don't know. And there was like a YouTube channel, and then they just stopped doing it. I think there was something happened there, but I don't know.
That's a shame. That's a shame.
I never knew Nolan North very well. I knew Troy pretty well, but he never answers my DMs. So
he doesn't?
No, because I DM'd him when I congratulated him for playing when I played Death Stranding. So that was like 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago. And I was like, you are awesome in this. What a great villain. And he's going to be the villain in the new one as well.
Oh, he is.
Yeah, he's this like the guy with the guitar is him.
He's confirmed. Oh
yeah.
My God.
You could just tell it's him.
He's a great actor. He really is a great actor.
Yeah, he's awesome. And so, yeah, and then I've messaged him a few times since, but he just doesn't. I don't know. Some people don't read their DMs, and why would you want to talk to me anyway? All right. So I'm a little conflicted on Sam personally. I don't really like him, but I don't know that you're supposed to.
Yeah.
It's okay to introduce characters that challenge the whole premise and make it a little uncomfortable. And I think Sam stands out because we're really used to a trio of characters, and maybe even 4 or 5. If you want to count Cutter and Chloe as like meaningful connections for these guys as well. We always have, there's some unease and some betrayal maybe, but you always find your way. Sam feels like he's constantly challenging Drake, and we know Drake in this game well enough to want him to not do this, right? Like, don't do it. And I think the game does a really nice job of even showing you his home life, showing you his work and all of the rest. Be like, don't do it. And he knows himself not to do it. He can go to Malaysia or whatever without permits and start looking for things, and he won't do it. Like, it's not the same anymore for him. And he has this old influence that comes back into his life that we never have really heard about, that is probably the cause of a lot of this rebelliousness and obviously the love of the treasure hunt and history and all this comes from his brother. But we don't want Drake to get sucked back into that world. In other words, if we were introduced to Sam in the first game, it would feel a lot different than the fourth game. You feel like he's and he lies to Drake and he almost causes Drake to lose Elena and Sully.
Sure.
So I'm not crazy about Sam, but I don't think you're really supposed to be. I think you're supposed to tolerate him, and it's supposed to be about love. And that's at least from my opinion. So that's interesting, but I don't care for Sam. I don't think he's a good character. I don't like him.
Yeah.
You know, he's there like a foil almost for Drake's own emotions and where his heart lies and his inability to let go and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the way I feel about it personally.
I love that, Kyle. And they give him that kind of Fonzie-like bravado where he's a little too braggadocious. He's a little too high on himself. And that's a great point. I mean, Nate at this point is out of the life. He's a salvage diver. He's in the suburban New Orleans. He's got this life with Elena. He's kind of, he's settled down, and his brother draws him out back into the life with a lie. And you are waiting. This is the thing. You're hoping for the best because you love Nate so much, but you are waiting with Sam, just everything we get from him, his personality, the things he says, the things he does. We're waiting for the double cross. And the double cross happens to be that he sucks Nate into the life for his help through a lie. But the thing is, he's the older brother, so it's ironic because he's supposed to be, via age, he's supposed to be the mature one, but he has those same qualities that Nate once had / maybe still has, where he's a thrill seeker. It's about him. It's about the adventure. It's about going to seek the treasure. It's not about everything else or anyone else, where Nate has more of a selfless perspective now. He's living for others as well. And Sam has more of that selfishness, and he hasn't let go. So he's dangerous. And the other dynamic that plays into it is, which I think they do a brilliant job, is Sully's protectiveness over Nate when it comes to Sam. Like, there's a history there with those three, and through Sully's eyes that because he knows that Sam is dangerous for Nate, especially where Nate is now or where Nate's trying to be. So it really plays out for a great dynamic and really does make for a lot of tension because poor Nate, we know what we're getting with him. We know he's the hero. He's the guy we're rooting for. And he's got enough to deal with all the baddies that he's up against, let alone, his friends, with friends like these, right? Like,
Right.
and that whole dynamic really exists now in the story, and it's interesting. And it's nice to see even that history with the brothers date back to when they're kids, and you could see the personalities and that they were supposed to be a duo. And I think Sam is a little bit, I don't know if jealousy plays a part or just feels kind of affronted that Nate's moved on. Like, this wasn't the plan. We were supposed to be the treasure seeking brothers, and this was supposed to be our life. And he knows that he could only draw him back in with a lie. And you're just waiting for that to happen. And then the way everything plays out with Rafe, and becomes this triangle of betrayal. And it's great. It's just I just love it so much. You're waiting to see if Sam's going to be a good guy or a bad guy, and then the secret is revealed.
Yeah, it is a deep double cross too. Like, when you find out later, I knew Hector Alcazar was a red herring. He didn't really matter. But I forgot how exactly it worked out when you find that all that out. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about a lot of the things later in the game too, and I think the game really picks up in a great way. I wanted to ask you about Drake's childhood, like what we see. He lives in an orphanage, like some sort of Catholic orphanage. I was thinking there's a scene that's kind of sad. I think that's like low key sad. You're playing as young Drake and you're hiding from the nun who's talking to the priest, and she's basically shit talking him. And I was thinking that must be rough. Like, Drake is so bad, I guess, that even the sisters are over him. Although the sisters were over me at Catholic school, so I don't think I was bad at all. I just don't think they liked me. They didn't like a lot of people. It didn't seem like. So who knows? And this was, I think, presumably in the 80s rather. 80. I think they show a date like on a document that shows like the mid 80s or something at some point. I don't know.
That sounds right. That sounds like it would be right. Yeah.
So it's a little rougher than it would be now or in my time in the 90s. But what did you think of that whole opening sequence and finding out that he's basically a ward of the state, for a lack of a better term?
Yeah. Your heart goes out because he doesn't have anybody. It reminded me, it was shades of mom and dad's stories from the 50s and 60s with the sisters at Catholic school, where, they were allowed to rap you on the knuckles with their rulers and shit like that. Like, they were allowed to induce physical violence. What I mean?
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it. It's totally crazy.
But I like the whole, not convent, orphanage thing where, it's like Nate's on his own. You kind of feel his loneliness, and the whole thing with sneaking around with the sister smoking at the window, like, and, like you said, shit talking him. And the brother, I guess, is old enough to now be out. He can't be really a ward of the state. He's not a minor any longer. So he can't be there with Nate. So Nate's really on his own. And I love the whole setup where you not only get the personalities of Nate and a little bit of Sam, but the whole thing of, I'm going to spring you from this place, and the way it echoes later on the Panamanian prison and stuff like that, because this is kind of like the orphanage is kind of the first Panamanian prison in a way. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, you definitely feel for Nate when you see his childhood origins and his beginnings, and it kind of gives you an understanding too into like that desire for boundless freedom. I'm going to be a treasure hunter. I'm going to travel the world and go where I want, when I want, and seek for treasure. So it kind of feeds into that whole thing of like, once you're not in captivity anymore, you take your freedom to like the nth degree. I kind of like that aspect of the storytelling.
So we end up finding Drake ultimately and in prison. There's a prison warden there that he's kind of working with, Vargas. This is where Rafe and Sam are as well. And there's actually a moment where you're breaking out of prison and you get to play as him briefly. I think this is the first time you play as Sam, right? For a minute in the game?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think this is the first time in the series you don't play as Drake, right?
Is that the first time ever? I'm trying to think.
I think so.
Yeah, I think.
I don't think you play.
Right.
Lost Legacy's not out yet at this point, and I don't think you play as like Chloe or anything like that in the other one. So no. I just thought that was pretty interesting. But they hatched this plan. I like the meta of it, of them having kind of this deal with the Vargas character and him kind of beating the shit out of them and then but using it or having fights staged so that he can remove him and send him out to these Panamanian ruins and kind of cut him into it or whatever. And we meet Rafe as well, who's an interesting villain. What did you think about the whole prison section?
Yeah, it's fun. You get to see the prison yard brawl, and you kind of think Nate's in trouble, but then you realize he's working with Vargas. He's kind of working with the insiders. And you know what I love about this stuff the most? You get to see the con man side of these guys. The same thing later on with Sully and Sam and Nate at that ritzy sort of auction gala. You know, you get to see the Ocean's 11 side. You get to see them work people, not just swinging on ropes and fighting pirates and the gunplay and the melee and all that kind of stuff. You get to see kind of the intellectual side of how they operate, you know, pickpocketing and conning and, you know, talking up the waiters and getting the inside scoop by being charming. You know, I love that. You know, I just kind of love seeing that side of these guys, because if you imagine, that would be a big part of the life, right? And kind of promising something like there's going to be, you know, you work with me and I'll take care of you on the other side. You help me get out of here, I'm going to give you half of this treasure or whatever. I like the wheeling and dealing aspect of stuff. That's fun stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I dig it too. And they even have a suggestion there that like there's an order of operations with who's good at what, like who's the better pickpocket, who should be
so fun.
People watching. Yeah, it's cool. It's very Ocean's style. Yeah, I dig it too. And did you see the Uncharted film by chance? That came out last year? You did? Yep. So this scene is central in that film, which is cool. And it's funny, Uncharted 4 was just not top of mind when I was watching that film. And I knew a lot of people were saying that Uncharted 4 was a big driver of that movie, but I don't think I realized how much of that movie was inspired by Uncharted 4. And this scene is like very faithfully recreated, right on down to the visuals, which is very cool. So it was neat to see that while that was still in mind for me. And yeah, I dig that too. Awesome. Kind of going around trying to get, you know, hatching this very complex scheme. You would think, for instance, that it would be easier to just steal billions of pounds that they could use to buy this thing at the auction instead of, you know, scheming up this thing for them to steal it. But nonetheless, they do. And so I'm wondering, and that's how I guess all this stuff kind of breaks out in the first place. But I'm wondering, we jump forward with the 15 years from the jail scene and all of this. What did you think about Drake's kind of current life as trying to like live a straight and narrow? He's like a salvager at Jameson Marine, comes important later on, unexpectedly important. But he's trying to just do this thing, and he doesn't really have the zest for adventure anymore. And it almost seems like Elena has a greater zest for adventure than he does. How do you feel about him trying to kind of get away from it? And this idea of him being, like we said, with his brother being pulled back in. Yeah,
you know, it hits home, I think, with me, with a lot of people, because it kind of, this will sound funny, but it's kind of alluding to work-life balance, right? Like tempering your passion or balancing your passion with being a family man or having a family. You know, I like the fact when they had to choose a profession for Nate to quote unquote go straight and have the suburban family life, and they picked salvage diver because it's a great way to leverage his skill sets, right? Totally. I mean, he could go like manage a Wendy's, but this makes a lot more sense. I like the way it kind of plays into what he's good at, and you could see him maybe if he had to do something and be on the up and up, this would be the acceptable thing for him, because it is still kind of adventure. It's kind of thrilling. We get a little taste of that even with the gameplay when they're kind of unearthing a treasure and pulling it up and everything like that. I think it's really neat. And it gives us sort of a glimpse into Nate's maturity, at least trying to go to the next step, if you will, of his life with settling down and sort of abandoning that life and the thrill seeking for, you know, embracing something that's a little more selfless, living for somebody else, being a husband, having a home, having a 9-to-5, whatever it is. And, you know, trying to honestly give it like the old college try. Like he's not miserable, but this is new for him. And, I don't know what the time jump is. It's several years from 3 to 4, I think. But we're seeing a more matured Nate. And I think it makes him even a little more likable, if that's even possible, because, this is Nate 2.0 now. It's a Nate 4.0, I guess you could argue, where it's like he's a mature human being. He's not just thinking about the next mission, the next adventure, throwing caution to the wind. And, he's got to be responsible now. I like it. And it's a great setup for the story when Sam gets his meat hooks in and drags Nate back into the life. It's not about, let's go get this treasure. Like, we got to do this. It's not this gratuitous thing. Sam paints it as a life and death situation. And he knows that's the only way to get his brother in because he loves Elena so much. So it's pretty, it's a pretty shitty thing to do to a brother.
Totally. That's why I think it's a shame. He's very weak in a way. Which I understand, weak to those he loves, weak to his passions and the danger that comes along with it. Yeah, really interesting. It's all very interesting. I love the whole scene at the house too. In fact, I wanted to ask you about the attic scene because that's one of my favorite scenes in the game if you take your time with it. Do you know what I'm talking about? And I wonder what you think of it when he's in his attic.
Yeah, refresh my memory with the attic.
It's like when he's going through all of his artifacts and telling himself stories about everything. And there's even that one scene, if you want, where you can take out the Nerf gun and shoot the targets.
Oh,
Did you do
I love that.
Yeah. And
that was so fun.
I love that. I thought it was very nostalgic and a lot of fun. He picks up the coin. He has the Nepalese or whatever banners and all of these different things and a picture of Tenzin, I think. And
yeah,
it's cool. Like if you're an Uncharted fan, if you've never played Uncharted before, you have no idea what any of this is. But if you play, and frankly, I've platinumed all of the Uncharted games except for this one twice, and I still don't even know some of the references off the top of my head. But I really, really liked that scene. I thought it was very warm,
so fun,
and well done. And then playing Crash Bandicoot, I was wondering what you thought of that,
dude. Yeah, first of all, the artifacts and the nods and the direct references back to previous Uncharted was so fun. And that's where I wanted to go back in and really just even watch walkthroughs to see, was that from 2? Was that from 3? But I love that thoughtful crafting and that world building of just alluding to the past, not only things that have happened, but things that he kept. It really makes for a substantial world and a character and experiences, and he's got these items accrued and these memories accrued and everything like that. And the Nerf gun thing was brilliant, but it really came to a head when you walk into that living room and you see the PlayStation. You see the PS1 sitting there and you're like, oh shit, what's this going to be? And then it turns out you get to play Crash Bandicoot, and then of course they echo that also at the end with Cassie, where you get to play. I love that whole thing at the end, again, with bringing things back. And just really, this game is as well crafted as the best movies, where they echo things and they don't drop details. Everything is attached. Everything has a purpose, even the smallest nuanced details. But playing Crash was such a treat. And again, like, why not have fun like that in a game and do those clever little details? And, it's a Naughty Dog IP. Why not want to, big up yourself? And also a little taste of retro. This was 3 consoles ago, man. This is heritage. This is pre-Uncharted, pre-Last of Us, Naughty Dog. This is good shit. Just fun. Just really a fun time. And to build that into the story, where there's this competitive thing between Elena and Nate, where who's better at Crash Bandicoot, and just sort of a loving nod to their relationship too. That's the type of stuff that's going to last in your memory when you walk away from a game. And, sort of the dust settles and it's months later or years later, you'll remember, oh yeah, they did that cute little thing, or they had this clever little touch. These are things that don't need to be in the game. They're just kind of incidental details, really. But just putting them in, just those loving nods and those loving bits of work that you put in. That's what makes a real AAA game, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're right. I love the send up, and I also love the work that goes into that. Sony doesn't own Crash Bandicoot. They had to get permission to do that, and so it costs money, and it requires legal, and it requires time. It's not just something you can do. And I like that they're willing, not that it's like the hardest thing to do. I'm sure Activision was thrilled to work with them, but and this was of a time when Sony was really promoting the new Crash games and all of that. So it all kind of worked out. But I just think that I like when effort is put in. You see something like that, and I won't even spoil what it is, but there's a similar echo in The Last of Us Part 2. I think people will know what I'm talking about in that. If you see that, and I'm like, I love that, because you can't just do this. Like, you can't, you gotta, first of all, you have to emulate the game. As far as I understand, you could play Crash, as long as you could survive, you can play it. And like right there on the TV. And I can't, I've always sucked at Crash Bandicoot. And I also kind of hate Crash Bandicoot, if I'm being really honest with you. I'm like, what is this?
That coming at the screen thing is tough.
Yeah.
That's really, really tough. I tell you, when Nate was playing, I couldn't finish the level, but I did get to the end of the level when Cassie was playing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I don't know how I did it, because it gets pretty tough there at the end. It gets pretty frenetic with the towards the screen platforming, but yes. And it gives you a score, and I didn't collect enough fruit, so I got a miserable looking Crash where he's sulking at the end, but I did finish the level, so I was proud of myself.
One of the things that I lament, and we see it in this scene, is that we don't get very much of Elena and Sully in this game. Not, in my opinion, not enough. We get way more Elena than Sully. And that's one of the things that I think I'm disappointed with in Sam being in the game. I understand you have to bring in characters. We brought in, we mentioned rather Chloe and Cutter earlier. Cutter's even mentioned in this game as like, they're like, oh, go call Charlie Cutter or whatever, which I thought was pretty cool.
That's cool. Not.
But so they do introduce some other characters, but generally speaking, it's about Sully and Drake, or I should say Drake and Sully, and ultimately Elena, who's a journalist that gets sucked in on one of their adventures and then becomes one of them, basically. And I feel like it's a little empty without them more, and especially Sully. Like, when I'm thinking about adventuring with Sam, and then I'm thinking of adventuring with Drake, I'm like, well, I'd kind of rather be with Sully, to be perfectly honest with you. Especially with the way Sully and Drake left it, it's very difficult,
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you think we see enough of those two characters?
Well, yeah, that's a tough one, because you do want more of Nate and Sully. You want that sort of father-son dynamic, but because it's awesome. And we love both of the characters. Both those characters are genuinely lovable characters. And as a duo, they're super appealing. But because we've gotten so much of that already, I understand why they were anchoring and centering on the actual brotherly relationship between Sam and Nate this time, because it's different. And that's really where the story focuses and where the tension is derived from too, because you kind of know in pairing up with Sam that Nate's in trouble in one degree or another. And he really can't get out of it, because even by the end, Sam is just so compelled. He's got the hooks in him, man. He's got the sickness. Like, he needs that thrill seeker thing. He just can't shake it. And Nate loves Sam so much that he feels compelled that he has to go after his brother, because he's going to get killed without him. Because he's got the blinders on. Sam's got the blinders on. So I understand why they centered on that, but it's a less appealing relationship. That's why, I'll get a little ahead of myself here, but that's why I think it would be cool to see another Uncharted game centering around the Cassie character, where Sam could be the mentor. Because I don't know if you want Nate to be back. I think you have to leave it where it would look like you were retconning if you brought Nate back again. He made a decision. He loves Elena. He's not in the life anymore, but his progeny could be in the life. And Sully and Sam going off together paints a nice picture of those two coming to some sort of terms. Like, they're not beefing. They're going to go off and it's going to be a new team up, and they could kind of dispel the bad blood. And I love sort of a triple layered protege mentor thing, where it's like Sam is now the mentor, Cassie is the protege, but Sully could still be on the scene in some sort of capacity too, whether that's an advisor or just be the pilot, the wheelman, just the escape, he's the escape pod type thing. And then Nate could be involved just maybe from afar. You know what I mean? Where it's not like Cassie's lying about being in this life. She has her father's blessing, but her father is serving in some sort of, council capacity. He's like the Gandalf now. He can't do that much, but he could sort of help you from afar type of thing. So that's, that would make Sam a more appealing character if we got to know him a little better. Now we could see him in a role where he could be really likable, where he could, and especially if he has that sort of genuine love for his niece, that could be something really interesting and fun. And who knows, that might be that's not a hard thing to think of. That might be exactly where they're intending to go with this.
Yeah, it could be. It's, it's interesting. And at the end, they actually do set up that, in my opinion, that Cassie has some sort of a relationship with Sully, because he says something in a letter like, keep the backgammon board warm or something.
It's so cute.
Or whatever.
And they have the picture together. Mm-hmm. And we know she's already like, you see that little kid adventurer magazine. We know she's already like, it says like young treasure hunter type thing. So she's not, she thinks her parents are, salvage. She thinks her dad's a salvage diver, which is kind of a treasure hunter in a way. So that's what she's already attached to. So when she finds out, no, your dad was Indiana Jones, like you're in the picture with the shotgun and the golden idol and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love the shot of them from the first game on the boat. Is good, super dude. Awesome. So we'll get to the ending later. Let's go back to the auction, which is a great scene. I want to ask you about the introduction of Nadine, a new character. Now, I have not played Lost Legacy. You and I are both on the same page on that. She's the main character apparently in that with Chloe.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's good to know.
So I feel like Nadine's interesting. I like the Shoreline PMC. I love PMCs in stories. I think they're scary. Private militaries and mercenaries and guns for hire, soldiers of fortune. I love that kind of shit. It's crazy. There are soldiers of fortune fighting right now, and American soldiers of fortune fighting right now in Ukraine, actually.
It's fascinating.
And so I like the idea of this character, and I like that she just beats the shit out of Drake. I think that's hysterical. But I don't know. I feel like this character's introduced and not really flexed too much. I'm not crazy about either of the villains, actually. Rafe, I feel like, is a little generic and lame. I don't feel like the acting is particularly good either. No offense to whoever plays him. It's Warren Cole, I think is the guy's name. I don't know who that is.
Okay.
But so I'm not crazy about that character. Nadine is a better performance, but I don't know. I don't feel like we see very much of her. And I do like kind of the grayness of her character, where she's at the end, she has enough. She's like, dude, we have enough. Like, we have millions of dollars. Like, can't we just get the fuck out of here? All my people are dead. I remember the one controversy, though, and I don't know if you know this, is that Laura Bailey plays her, and Laura Bailey's white.
Yeah.
And that was I thought that was very strange. Even at the time, I was like, it was a strange move for Naughty Dog to make, especially. And maybe Nadine is mixed. I don't know.
And that was a bone of contention for a lot of people at the time.
Yeah. But yeah, so I thought that was strange, but good performance, good acting. Just don't really quite understand the point of the character. Yeah,
I mean, it made me realize with the villains in this game that, and we've talked about this certainly in parts 2 and 3 already, where, we have to remember the baddies or the antagonists, they're sort of a vehicle because there has to be a chase to the treasure, right? You have to be racing somebody towards the treasure. It made me think of something, Kyle, that I would like to see, or maybe I thought would be interesting in Uncharted, especially in this iteration, to kind of shake things up a little bit, to kind of adapt a sort of Lupin the Third type of formula where there's police, like law enforcement, like an Interpol inspector, like Inspector Zenigata, and there's like some sort of Fox and the Hound type of seemingly infinite chase between Nate, who's always on the run from the law, and this Interpol inspector who wants nothing more than to get this guy and get him in handcuffs and stop him from his life of crime, type of thing. So that would have been interesting to have somebody who's just as skillful and just as addicted to his life, sort of like that Heat Vincent Hanna versus the career thief type thing, where that would have been an interesting way to shake things up. With the Rafe and Nadine characters, they're interesting. I mean, Nadine, they're mildly interesting characters. What I like about her is that and they show this several times, she's a real badass. Like, when it comes to one-on-one fist fighting, like, Nate could not get the upper hand on her. He got his ass kicked, and it seemed like she might have even had the upper hand with Nate versus Sam if that whole thing wasn't interrupted. Like she's a bona fide badass, and I like sort of that femme fatale thing is very interesting because she's a badass. She's brawny. She's this mercenary paramilitary leader, but she's also beautiful. And she could do that whole Ocean's 11 thing too, where she meets Sully at the gala, at the auction. And also it's established that there's a heritage there. You know, there's history there between Nadine and Shoreline and Sully and Nate. You know, they've been on the trail of probably the same treasure a few times. So, and they're not exactly happy to see each other in the same place. I like that. And then the Rafe character is funny, man. He reminded me of Bradley Cooper or something a little bit, like the pretty boy, the trust fund baby who doesn't want to just rely on, you know, his windfall. Like he wants his legacy to be something else. That's kind of interesting. That's an interesting character, and it's kind of dangerous because he has a fortune at his disposal to use as a means to his end, to buy people, to sort of steer things the way he wants it to go. His kind of what makes him a force to be reckoned with is his money. And you kind of almost got to hand it to him a little bit because he doesn't want that trust fund to be his legacy. He wants to be in the life too. He's got a thrill seeker, treasure hunter thing going on too. He's just a bad dude. You know, he's got evil intentions. Kind of interesting. I think they could have fleshed out the characters a little more. And then when these two are working together, Rafe and Nadine don't seem like they would authentically work well together. They seem to be very different. The other fascinating thing about Nadine is she seems pretty young to be the head of this, you know, modern pirate organization. It's pretty interesting, you know, that she's that powerful and that she has that much pull, you know, she has that much station. But yeah, interesting. But again, just kind of a means to an end, just to give Nate and Sully and Sam and Elena somebody to chase against. But it would have been nice to not see the parallel chase this time. It would have been nice for, I think, a force or a group of antagonists to be chasing them, not chasing the same thing, not going after the same goal. Could have been an interesting way to kind of flip things on its
I love that,
on its side and do something a little original, you know, this time.
No, I love that, dude. I mean, I think that would be, I love that idea because there is something that we have a really difficult time squaring with Uncharted. And I think the more realistic it's become, the more this really stands out, which is how do you square Drake's behavior with reality, kind of? The reality is Drake, and I know it sounds foolish, but if you want to just think about it realistically or in some sort of real frame, like real world frames, like how did this work? Drake has murdered lots of people, right? Straight up killed them. Now, a lot of these people, actually, I would argue every one of them was trying to kill him. Although there are scenes like in the in Uncharted 2, in the beginning of Uncharted 2, when you're sneaking through the museum, you kill stealth. You don't kill them, you knock them out. It's an interesting point. That's right. So yeah, you don't actually kill anyone without them trying to kill you first, I guess, theoretically. But even in this game, you can get the jump on all these guys. You can sneak through peacefully in a lot of these places. In fact, there are trophies to do it. But you can also initiate hostilities. And I mean, that's... And I think you have to square that. And I also just think it's interesting, and again, not trying to be lame, but just blatant antiquities theft, right? With like Museum of London style things that are going on here. And I just, how do you feel about that? Like, how is that squared? Because what's interesting, I guess, and this goes back to the ending, is, and in the end, also the attic scene, is that when Cassie's not alive, he's kind of he puts this upstairs in a pretty cool attic. I wish I had an attic like that. Like cool attic. My attic is just like my air conditioning unit and a bunch of boxes and shit. But he has this cool attic and he's got his stuff kind of displayed and he's remembering them. But when he has something to really lose, like a child, and he's on the up and up, he chooses to take those very same things, which are not the most valuable things he has or has seen, but are relics of these various adventures, and puts them away, hides them, and doesn't want to talk about them anymore. And that's kind of an interesting, like, First of all, before I even go any further, how do you feel about that? Because then I want to spool up a potential story here. But how do you feel about squaring that? Do you think it's important, or do you think we have to just kind of let it go?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this with every Uncharted, and it is, it's part of the conversation, the body count, but also just the collateral damage to the places they go. I mean, they destroy entire villages and cities and shit like that. You could see a group of international police in like some conference room being like, we have to stop these guys. Like they're destroying people, they're destroying lives, they're destroying property, they're destroying entire small countries, like, and they're just in the name of treasure hunting. I think it's a little less egregious in 4 because you're killing this mercenary organization who's doing the same thing. They're there for the same reasons, and they, you would think these guys know what they're putting at risk, by being in this world or whatever. But, and what you say too, where Nate has these keepsakes, these reminders of his past adventures. And
yeah, the gold doubloon is not anywhere close to the most valuable thing he's ever had. It's just,
there you go.
It's a keepsake, but also evidence of this antiquities plunder. I guess this is what I find so strange. Like, and again, even if every one of those deaths was justified, wouldn't you have some sort of PTSD at this point? Dude, you've ended entire bloodlines. Like, yeah. Through and through and through and through and through. It's an incredible thing. That's the hard thing about, and we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess, but it's one of the difficult things about revisiting Uncharted is I just think the more you revisit it, the more you have to explain some of this stuff. Because you're right. The stuff in Madagascar, for instance, is one thing with all of the shit that happens there. But when they're in, actually, is that Madagascar too? Or are they in like Southeast Asia at this point? I don't even know, when they're driving through and just destroying that village. It's like, this is news, like newsworthy. Wouldn't people be interested in who did this?
That's insane.
So there is, like, you have to disconnect yourself. You really, I know it's a video game, but I'm not crazy about always disconnecting myself from all reality when your game takes place in reality. And so I think that's the one thing that can get a little dangerous for them is you come back to this and then Cassie's getting into the life and all this. You got a lot of explaining, I think, to do at some point about how this is all possible, unless you really just want people to suspend disbelief, but that's not really their style. I mean, and by they, I mean Sony, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a great point, really their style.
No.
If the world is extra, they'll let you know. If it's like God of War, you'll know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it seems to take place in some sort of groundedness. I don't know.
No, you're right. I mean, it's kind of both things. And I think all of Uncharted is. I think, it requires suspension of disbelief, but I think it all comes down to tone, right? Like Uncharted is very upbeat. It's about adventure. It's playful. It's relatively lighthearted. But it does kind of walk that line because it is very realistic. The visual presentation is very realistic. It's not stylized in any way, especially aesthetically. So, you're treading a razor's edge on that. And it would be interesting to see that Uncharted that does play with the emotional and, really the emotional ramifications of these things. Like a whole sort of the same world, but painted in a different brush, really presented with a different tone. That would be interesting. I honestly don't want that in Uncharted because for me, Uncharted is literally saying what and talking out loud and having a blast and, throwing a grenade and seeing pirates fly in the air. I don't want to see the pirates' limbs fly off. You know what I mean? It's like, it's the Wilhelm scream. It's and stuntmen go flying. It's like, I don't want to see saving the opening of Saving Private Ryan in Uncharted. That's weird. But if you could have an Uncharted type of a vehicle and paint it with that Saving Private Ryan brush, I think it would give me PTSD. But it might be an interesting thing to try. That might be fun. But I know what you're saying. I think part of what you're saying is that visually, it's not really cartoony, but the tone is very cartoony. And that's why I always think of Ocean's 11 when I think of Uncharted, not just Indiana Jones. I think of the Ocean's world because what these guys do, Matt Damon and George Clooney and, Brad Pitt, like those characters are operating in a world where what they're doing is literally impossible. Nobody is that clever. Nobody is that charming, but it's very realistic. It's modern day Vegas. It's all the trappings, all the visual trappings of what you would see if you went there tomorrow. So I understand that, but yeah, again, it's suspension of disbelief. But you piqued my interest with creating like, I guess really that does exist in things like The Last of Us. But even then, in a game especially, you have to, it would be interesting to build in time in a game to have to deal with the emotional baggage of what's going on. But how do you make that entertaining, I guess?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to do it.
Naughty Dog's next game is going to be you play as the prosecutor that's bringing down Nathan Drake. Here's the thing is that it's not what I want. I don't want consequences for Nathan Drake at all. I want him to get away with all of it. And I want him to do more of it. I don't give a shit.
Hell yeah.
But it is the reality of Sony's drive towards realism and acceptability of video games are going to require answers to this, because if this was a film, I think a film series, people would start to be like, well, this is kind of reading like Hard to Kill or something like that.
By the time that Interpol agent goes after it, it's like, this guy has killed 876 people.
Right.
Like we have to get a leash on this dude.
Totally. It's crazy. All right, let's get back into some of this plot stuff. I wanted to ask you about some specific stages that I really liked. In the basement of there are beautiful parts of this game. I took so many screenshots. I love the PS5 makes it so easy to take screenshots. It's comical. I just take a ton of them, and then you can look at them on your phone. They send them directly to your PlayStation app. So it's awesome. And then you just look at them and I'm like, man, oh man. Plus there's a photo mode, but I don't think you even need that. Photo mode's awesome though, because that the game is fully rendered and there are no tricks because you can detach the camera and all that. So that's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
But there are some beautiful things in the game and some beautiful sequences. But one of the things I wanted to call out first, before we get into any of this, the more specifics, is, did you notice and did you appreciate the little things that especially were in the background of shots that I think were only possible because of the PS4? There's a scene where you're in Drake's house, actually in Elena's office, and they render people walking outside. And there's like a guy walking his dog, and there's like a woman walking by, whatever, in the other direction, and all of this. And I just stood there. I'm like, wow, this is totally unnecessary. And then I was standing outside of the Jameson building and looking kind of at the skyline and all that. It was nighttime, I think, and there's just flickering lights turning on and off, cars driving. There are just a lot of things that make the world lived in and feel right and feel good. I'm just curious what you think about the aesthetic. It seems to be consistently really beautiful. And really, I say this a lot about Naughty Dog, and it sounds fanboyish, which is fine. I don't really care what people think about it. It's just because it's just so evident to me. I know video games. This is so above and beyond what other games are doing now, for the most part, nonetheless, what they were doing then. And I don't know, it stood out to me still. It obviously looks more beautiful on PS5 and all of the rest, but I just think it stands up a great deal. And there are just so many little things in the game that are so beautiful. I'm wondering if you noticed.
Yeah, so many small, thoughtful details. And that's what makes the world feel immersive. No matter where you go in this game, all of those small little things exist. All those, quote unquote, unnecessary details that just paint a world that feels like you're really living in, vis-a-vis Nate and Sam and everybody. The first thing that dawned on me with this game, like all the previous Uncharted's, is there's a nice contrast in locations. You get a little bit of suburban New Orleans, you get Panama, then you go to Scotland, which is a really nice contrast visually, and then Madagascar, which we'll talk about. Everything's so beautifully rendered, and everything just looks beautiful. Not even to talk about the animation yet or the character stuff. But what really kind of dawned on me was how great the stuff looked, but also just the atmosphere wherever you went. They did a great thing where there was a there's a lot of atmospheric lighting. They do things with fog. Eventually you do things in the cave with fire where things are barely lit, but you get a lot of detail and nuance in that like time of day immersion. Like sometimes you feel like it's dawn. Sometimes you feel like it's early morning. Sometimes you feel like the sun's about to set. Sometimes it's deep at night. And you really intuitively feel time of day like a movie. That's a rare experience in a game. Other games do it, but I feel like that's rare where you feel like, oh, you kind of almost feel the emotions of that time of day. This game did that super well. And the other thing was that there's a lot of straight up aesthetically beautiful detail where nature is reclaiming shit. Nature is reclaiming all these once majestic man-made structures, new and old, where it looks like the land and the ocean are taking everything back. So you have these beautiful, ornate pirate mansions in Libertalia, but you have the flowers and the vines and the algae and the lichen and the roots. And it looks realistically how that stuff would take over, you know, where the roots are going up through the springs of the couch and stuff like that. Really beautiful on two fronts. Beautiful because you knew this was once this super posh place. And then beautiful again with just nature taking it back and all the colors and the water seeping in and making things deteriorate and rainbow colored mold and all of that. It's very beautiful, like a piece of artwork, but also very realistic at the same time. I feel like that's dangerous in a game because I feel like it could take you out of even just of purpose and intent. What am I trying to do? But it really is so glorious because you really feel like you're there. You don't just feel like you're a puppet pulling the puppet strings. You feel like you are Nate. Like you feel like you are up on that shaky wooden rafter. You feel like you are in that field of heather in Scotland with the giant stones. You feel like you are in the mud and that Jeep is sinking down into the mud in Madagascar. It's so beautifully done. And then the pirate galleon at the end and the drama, just like the visual drama of it. It was like, wow, I'm playing the end of the Goonies. Like this is One-Eyed Willie's pirate ship in the pirate cave at the end of Goonies. It feels like an opportunity to really see those things, you know, and you're like, whoa, like the massive scale of that pirate ship, all built of wood and how enormous and heavy it is and all the gold intricacies and how expensive everything looks. It's just, I can't think of another game. Even the other Uncharted's paled in comparison to this one where it came to just setting, atmosphere, and variety. Just beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It really is beautiful. I wanted to call out a couple areas I really loved. At the auction, the wine cellar I thought was really beautiful. The lighting in the wine cellar I don't know if it plays quite the same on PS4, but on PS5 it is exceptional. The way the wood looks, the way the stone looks, the contours of the stone and the way the light bounces off of it. Lighting is so meaningful to the visual acuity of a game, and it's just getting to an absurd degree, not only with ray tracing and all the other technological advancements that are happening in gaming, but just generally speaking. I thought that was a beautiful section. And later on, the fight scene between Nathan and Nadine was awesome. And it looks beautiful as well. I love when she takes her heels off as she's getting ready to beat him up and all of that.
So
it's really neat scene. And then finally, when at that same time when Drake busts back into the lobby area of the building and Sam is pinned down by gunfire, that shot is a beautiful, doesn't cut, zooms in, allows you to play immediately. I love that. Sony's flavor of trying to keep you immersed, I think, is really cool. And the games read a certain way, the way the camera swings and they're talking, and you just know to pick up your controller or start playing again. And it's cool. Or you'll stand there for a second and you'll realize to move. And that's where I wanted to kind of recall something I brought up earlier in our conversation, Dig, which was just destructible environments. The destructible environments are frustrating. I actually played the game on hard. And
did you really?
Yeah, I played it once before, so I was like, why not just try to do it differently? Not that I remembered it at all, but and it's annoying because, like, you know, wood is being destroyed, pillars are getting thinned out, but the animations when Drake's like leaning against a pillar and the bullets are flying and things are flying, it looks stunning. Like I was just staring at parts of it and I was dying over and over again, but I was just like looking at it and just being like, wow, this is amazing. His face like going back and forth, and just the facial animations and the mocap, just wonderfully done. And that's, again, the power of PS4 and later now PS5 to a greater degree. The power of the PS4 allows for things like destructible environments and things that we take for granted now that will, I think, become more common in games, was something that was very difficult because the game has to remember all of this. We were talking recently on Sacred Symbols that the reason that Starfield will probably run at 30 frames a second on Xbox, which I think is really not good in this era, is because of their insistence on having the game remember everything you do in a room and things you pick up and put in your inventory, and you can interact with everything. And that comes at a cost, at a technical cost. And finally, at least in a game like this, that's more linear and action oriented, that they can bring that to bear by making the environments react a little bit more to the fucking heinousness that's happening around you, which adds to the total, which eliminates places for you to hide and forces you in the corners and makes you fight. Sure. I think that's one of the interesting things about this game, is that it makes you fight. Now, there are lots of parts of the game where you sneak around. Like I said, there are parts of the game where you don't have to fight at all if you can figure out how to get through it. But when the gunfight begins, you got to fight. There's really no way to truly hide. If I was on a big map or a big set piece and I could find a place where I could actually be, it was usually in a corner hanging off.
Yes.
Where like no one can get to me. And even then, if a guy would come and they would still stomp on your feet or on your fingers and like shoot you off and stuff like that. So I like how the game makes you engage. And I think a lot of that actually comes from the destructibility of the environment, which can only be rendered with a more powerful machine. So I wanted to say that as well. And one of the things that I loved too, I think it's in Scotland, is I don't know. No, it might be in Libertalia actually. Is the I can't remember. No, I think it's in Scotland. It's definitely in Scotland. Is the castle, very Castlevania like vibes. The ruins going up and down stairs that lead to nowhere and walls that are crumbling into nothing. I thought it was a really, really neat way to make things. The aesthetic of things pop as well. And then my favorite aesthetic part is actually in Madagascar, which is the clock tower.
Oh,
I love the clock tower. I always relate clock towers to Castlevania, and I always look to Castlevania as my touchstone for all things. So it's no surprise it comes up here, but I loved that scene. Just climbing up and solving the puzzle and falling down it. Really, really good shit. Just adventurous and stylish and fun. So that's good stuff there as well. I wanted to ask you, Dag, about how do you feel about the focus on Saint Dismas in this game? This is a real biblical character, although I don't think he's named in like the canonical Gospels. I could be wrong, but for the story of when Jesus dies, he's crucified with two other people that are also being crucified for. These guys are crucified for theft, and I think one of them asks. Jesus is basically looked at as a savior, and one of them says something along the lines of, if you're really the savior, bring me to heaven with you. And the other one says, please remember me in heaven. And that's Dismas, I think. I think that's the story, basically.
Yes, I think that's basically it in a nutshell.
So what did you think about the focus on this kind of obscure biblical character, the penitent thief, and the connection to, I guess, the theft at Libertalia, as the phrase of society, of this pirate society, come tumbling down?
Yeah, it's funny how life works sometimes, and the coincidences, because, with going to church, I'm Catholic, right? I'm probably, I don't know, we're just probably like 7 for 10 attending church every week, but I have to admit, dude, I get bored like a child in church. It's like the longest hour of my week.
You got to bring your G.I. Joes.
Play with my G.I. Joes up on the thing, eat my Cheerios. Like, I'm not that far removed from that. Like, I get really bored. But it means a lot to Helene, and I go along, and it's fine. But we have this one priest in particular. If he's giving mass that Sunday, his homily, I can't. Like, it's just so boring that I just pick up a missalette. I pick up the book and I'll just read stories. I'll just do the readings because it's so much more interesting. And around Christmas time, I was reading this story. Maybe it was around Christmas. Yeah, it was a few months ago. I was reading a very similar story where it was, Jesus being sacrificed on the cross and the two men being sacrificed with him. And what, they were both thieves. They were both criminals of some nature. And one was the sort of penitent, the one that sort of embraced Jesus in his dying minutes. And the other one was still casting aspersions and doubt and everything like that. And telling Jesus, like, you're a fake type of thing. And, to the Dismas character, Jesus was like, basically like, I'll see you in heaven. Like, you have an invitation. There's an open invitation. I'm going to see you like in heaven very shortly, or that type of thing. So that's really interesting because this whole story really centers on that. The treasure that they're going after, refers to this whole story, Bible story. So that was an interesting bit of mythology that seems largely true, interestingly enough. So it was cool to see that creep in because I had just been reading about it. And what you said to me too, Kyle, just really resonated because I realized with this game, it was especially special because this is a lot bigger of a game. The world is a lot bigger. The world building is a lot bigger. The environments are larger. And it is very intuitive. Integrating the cinematic drama with the gameplay was one thing, but also the design and the level design and the navigation was really expertly crafted. Like, I think a game like this, it's sort of a third-person shooter action platformer. Yes, you have the puzzle elements. Yes, you have some light exploration. But a big thing about this is keeping the momentum and maintaining the rhythm. You don't want to slow it down. It's a treasure hunt. So you want to keep that. You want to keep up that frenetic pace. And this game does it so well. I realized pretty early on, with certain levels where you're able to explore a little bit on foot and some, by Jeep, that the levels were big enough to go off and veer down different paths, different forks. But it was always somehow obvious, just in that level design, what was the direct route to the next goal and what would have sent you off on, looking for little side quest treasures or alternate paths. They did an amazing job with that in the level design and the navigation of just visually saying it. You don't stop and read a sign and it doesn't say go this way. Just the visual cues. And sometimes it was birds flying. Sometimes it just looked like a formation of trees that you were meant to go under. It always said to me, I had very rarely seen this in a game. It always said to me, go this way in a very subtle way, but direct enough to know this is the way to go. If you need to get through this tonight, go this way. If you want to explore, then go off to the left. I had never seen that in a game before. So not just the beauty of the visual design and the props and the characters and the environments, but the design of, how to proceed. It was so well crafted. I've never seen anything like that. And sometimes the visual cues are bigger, like out in the savannah, you'll see two statues that you're supposed to drive through. And those are kind of markers. But sometimes it's very subtle clues, but it was always somehow apparent where to go. I don't know if you had the same experience, but that was something that really struck me over the head with this and made me realize how difficult and time consuming of a process that must be, because you're sort of modeling and sculpting these assets zoomed in, but at the same time, you have to zoom out and consider the larger picture of just traversing a level. And that's where I think the process of game design is a little foreign to me. So it's extra fascinating where it's like, that has to be considered too, not just how things look, not just the weather effects and particles and dust and fog and where the light's coming in, but also how is the player going to proceed and in a fluid way without getting stuck, without getting soft locked, without getting frustrated. We have to go back and reroute a million times. How to make that intuitive. This game was a masterclass in that. I was really in awe of it, with especially in that aspect.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wrote in my notes, visual language draws your eye through design. And it totally does. There's a part in The Last of Us that I actually make fun of sometimes. I probably did on our show and I have on Sacred Symbols. And it's not a spoiler, so don't worry if you've not played the game. But there's just a section in the beginning part of the game where you have to run with Sarah, and you have to run into the grassy area next to the street. and there's a break in the barrier, like those metal street barriers that stop you from crashing through. There's like a break in it, and then there's like a light above it, and it shines down on it. But then there's also like a yellow piece of tape, like police tape that's like fluttering in the air to draw your eye, being like, this is where you have to go.
Brilliant.
But I'm like, it's too much. I always said that. I'm like, that's so, it reads so weird. Like, why couldn't the light just draw your eye? And it seems like little things like that, the subtleties of that, they got a lot better in. And you really have to pay attention to the way the game treats it too. Like the triggers and the one-off moments are really interesting because the game definitely not only visually builds things to draw your eye, but also pitches the camera sometimes. Like if you walk into an area, the game will just pitch the camera up and to the right, for instance, a little bit. And in the distance, you'll see like a tower. And you kind of just know and read. And I think this really comes through not only expert design game after game, but also through focus testing. I think a lot of this comes through confusion. This is where the pickup lines and all of these things come up where it's like, why don't you move this, Nate? There's a box up there. Like that wasn't in the game originally. That was in the game in the later stages of development when people were playing it and getting stuck there. And so you imagine that those little pitches and all of that also come from there. Plus they have a really good in-game system of just pressing whatever button prompt it's like you want to hint. Yeah, and I think that that's really cool too. So sometimes you're right; it's really obvious. There's like in Madagascar, there's like a plume of smoke in the distance. It's like, okay,
yes,
that's obvious. But there are smaller things in the Madagascar sections that tell you where to go too, like the little cairn rock formation.
Yes,
thing.
exactly.
If you find those, you're on the right path, and that's something you only put together when you've played through it and also explored that full area. See. The interesting thing, though, is that although the design is great, I don't feel like Uncharted benefits from these open areas. I was curious how you feel about that. When I play Uncharted, I want a curated experience.
Okay.
I know it's cool to like let's say you're in like a tomb and you go left and there's a treasure and you go right and that's the path. Or you go left and there's a branch and one of them is a dead end and another is a treasure and then you go right to the main path. Like that's Uncharted to me. But giving me a car, like a Jeep or a boat, and then saying just go wherever you want, that seems cool and it's beautiful. There's beautiful moments when you do all that and you see beautiful things, beautiful sunsets, the weather changing. The changing weather's awesome on the island, especially with the boat as you're surviving, and like it's very subtle that's even happening. And I really, really love that. But I don't know. Did you like it? Did you like those open areas for what they were? Because I feel like they are a response to the times. And not necessarily what the series demands. And there's one other thing this game does that I think is even clearer with that I want to talk to you about. But did you feel like the game benefited from that? Because I actually don't. I feel like I want the game to tell me where to go because that's not why I'm playing this game. You know, I don't want to be lost in Uncharted. I don't ever want to not know where I'm supposed to go. That's not Uncharted. That's Far Cry. Else. You know, I don't know. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? That's exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I love that point. And I have a couple of things to say about this. Yeah, I mean, in the name of momentum and sort of continuing what you know of past Uncharted experiences, and you want that rapid pace, I could see kind of wanting that again. I like, from a game design perspective, from Naughty Dog's perspective, I like changing it. I like not only catering to the hardware and saying we can make it bigger now, let's try something a little different here. But also what you say about maybe giving people what they expect or playing up to people's expectations now with the hardware too, you know, is that kind of, was it sort of selling out in a sense, or was it really boldly just trying to make something new or add on? I like having the option for me because it tells me, again, with that intuitive level design, it tells me I could play like Uncharted 2 and 3 if I want to, and it's pretty apparent how to do that. But if I want a side quest, or if I just want to go off and savor the experience of the game and see everything and really enjoy just being immersed in this larger world this time, I could do that too. I like having the option. And I think it would be more problematic if you were getting turned around and lost when you really did want to just keep proceeding. But because that level design is so clean and so intuitive and there's the cues, I like that. Here's my question for you though, Kyle. We're both old school gamers, and it's been a joy for me to go back, especially with KnockBack, and experience these newer games. And I'm having such a blast. They're so awesome. But games are largely a lot different. Not all games, but games, I would argue, as a 49-year-old man, are generally a lot easier than games in the old days, where games were supposed to be cryptic back then. I say back then, name your era, name your period. Are these games too easy? Now, you're saying with certain things like that example in The Last of Us that you talked about, where it hits you too over the head, it's a neon sign with the flashing marquee, it's too much. But are games not cryptic enough? You know, like I'm a very deliberate player, and I still finish this game in probably 14 hours. You know, that's very fast for me. And
wow, did you really? That does seem fast. I don't know how long.
14,
I don't know
not
how long
even. Yeah, I was shy of 15 hours. I think.
For time. Yeah, I want to see the. I'm always slower than what Time to Beat says. Like always way slower.
Always way slower.
Oh yeah, average 15 hours. Yeah, that's. I want to say
I
I
was
took
pretty
more
much
like,
on time.
Yeah, I want to say I took more like 20 hours maybe, but I was trying to find treasures and stuff.
Okay, yeah, I didn't side quest for treasures that much. Here and there, I did. I gotta say, I'm also a victim of. We talked about this with our past Uncharted games. I really want to play more third-person shooters, and I get to the point, even with this game, where I enjoyed the overall experience very much. I'm kind of pressing for the next combat, bit of combat, and that's really what I love the most. If I'm authentically honoring my heart. Like that just says to me, Diggin, go play more third-person shooters. I like first-person shooters.
Oh my God,
too.
I could recommend you third-person shooters all day that you'd love.
That's what I love.
You should play Gears of War. I mean,
that's what you always tell me. Yeah. And I haven't done it yet. So that I have
we
to
should do that for the show. We should do that for the show. I'm going to write that down. We should play Gears of War
would be fun.
Yeah,
that would be really fun. And that would sort of satiate my need for that, and then when I play a game like this, I would not be more inclined to rush through the platforming, rush through the puzzles and all that kind of stuff. I could really savor it more. But that's the thing with me, is that I often think, and listen, I didn't play on hard, I played on moderate, right? Because on this game, what do you have? You have moderate's not even in the middle, because there's 7 difficulty levels. It's Explorer, Light, Moderate.
Explorer, Light, yeah.
Hard, Crushing, and Brutal. So I played on normal. I could have played on hard too. But I do think it's a little too, like, maybe it spells it out for you a little too much. Maybe you should have to work a little harder to progress. Do you ever get that sense, or did you get that sense from this game? Yeah,
I think a lot of that comes, if you're looking for difficulty in combat, just up the difficulty, because you'll just take less damage, or you'll be able to take less damage before you die.
Great point.
I think that the games you're looking for exist. Like, I think you would absolutely love a game like Vanquish. Like, that game is fucking phenomenal. Phenomenal game. And that's for people that don't know, a third-person shooter, I think from 2009, I want to say, maybe 2010, Platinum Games. And we always used to say at IGN, and I know it keeps coming up and I'm such a nerd, but it reads like a G.I. Joe game. Like, this is what a G.I. Joe game could be.
That's awesome.
And it's super fun and really all about combat. And so, yeah, I would recommend that, Gears of War. I mean, there's a bunch in that. You can go back to PS2 and even play games like Kill Switch and stuff like that if you really want to get crazy with it. And of course, games like The Division, if you want to get into more like third-person shooter role-playing games, which are fun. But yeah, so there's a lot for you there. But I think the beauty is, and the point I'm making is that those games exist. I don't know that Uncharted has ever been, like, I think this is more Uncharted than has ever been. Mm-hmm. And I think that, is it too obvious? Does it make it too easy? Perhaps, but things come, when you're making games, like, you have to kind of decide what you want it to be. And I don't think you can really have it be all of these things. So for me, I think what they want to do is make a generally linear adventure story action shooter that's really high quality and beautiful. And the second they start opening it up or giving you options is the second that they have to take attention away from other things to do that. That's why I wanted to call out this other thing that I thought was very peculiar. And I said it from the moment it happened, because I remember it being shown also at PSX in the lead up to the game's release, which is the very brief times when you can make choices and in your conversation.
Yeah.
This, and I said this at the time, and I'll reiterate it now because I do feel the same way about this, is this doesn't see Nathan Drake or Uncharted for what it is. I'm not Nathan Drake. Nathan Drake is Nathan Drake. I don't watch movies for me to put in, wait, hold on a second. ask that guy what this before you move on to the next scene.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you do that. You're showing me the thing. This is not a choose your own adventure. And it's not Mass Effect or something like that where you are Shepard. You literally create him, or Fallout where you're in the character creator. It's like, that's you. That's you. You're making him. So I feel like that little thing, I remember seeing that and people were cheering and going crazy. It was the conversation between Sam and Drake at the dock when they're, and it's just like, tell me about this. Tell me about this. Not a big deal, but just like, even Naughty Dog can succumb to following trends and shoehorning things into games that don't belong there and lose sight of what this is supposed to be. This is when Drake is not in the third person scene with a gun in his hand and like moving, I shouldn't have any facilities over the game, in my opinion. You know?
Love that point. I love it.
So I thought that was a strange choice as well, but overall not a huge deal. I also wanted to ask you about a mechanic that is added to this that we brought up a little bit earlier. It's not a mechanic that's added per se, because again, Uncharted 2 introduces stealth, but stealth is a much bigger thing. It comes off a little bit. Now it's a year later, so it's definitely not inspired by it. It couldn't possibly be, but it reads to me a little bit like Metal Gear Solid 5. And which was all about just fucking skulking around in the grass like this. Did you enjoy it? Did you play like that? Did you try to stay stealthy? I must say that knowing that I was going to blow it eventually, like sometimes I'd be able to kill everyone without being seen in an area and that would be fun. But towards the end, I was blowing it and then getting killed where I was just going in. I was like, I know Leroy Jenkins and just fucking figuring out how to do it that way. So I'm wondering how you played with stealth in the game.
It was very quickly established and apparent to me that stealth would play a bigger part in this game. And I was really happy to see that because you could have it both ways for your combat now. You could go right out and do the gunplay overtly, or you could be more stealthy and take a slower, more careful approach. And I got to compliment you, especially on hard, for getting through entire swaths of enemies with going stealth. I was never able to do that. Now, what I would do, my approach would be, and again, this was awesome and very enjoyable because it gave me the best of both worlds. I would go into an area initially and stealthily, crack the necks of the first 3 to 4 soldiers. And then eventually with the 4th or 5th one, I would headshot them and then thereby alerting the rest of the enemies. So I had 4 or 5 already down. And then I would, sort of run and hide and displace and everything like that and kill the rest of the enemies as quickly as I could. But I think that was really fun because the enemy AI in this was really tight. I thought it was really, really good and you had to react. So if you get a bead on an enemy, they'll displace. They'll figure out what you're doing from cover or whatever. If you sort of stay in one place too long, they'll try to flank you and cooperate and stuff like that. So you quickly realize that you have your work cut out for you. Eventually they're going to draw you out. The alert status, once it goes off and it remains high, it's very difficult to shake the enemy soldiers once they're onto you. I noticed that if you stay somewhere too long, they'll pepper you with grenades until you move. Like you can't go to cover in one particular spot for too long. They'll ferret you out. So I realized what I did in this game, it felt like staying kinetic was the key. Hide, pepper a couple of guys, hide again. And then also, of course, which I love in this game, and I'm so glad and gratified they held on to, is the life gauge or energy system where as long as you're safe and somewhere undercover for a certain amount of period of time, whatever it is, 5 seconds or whatever, you re-energize. So that plays into your tactic too, where you have to hide long enough to recover your health, and then you could go back out, pepper a couple of guys, you take a couple of shots, go to cover again, heal, and then that type of thing. And I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. And I like the fact too that the enemies didn't respawn. Like there was a finite sort of number of enemies in a specific area, and once you took care of them, you were okay. You could kind of exhale again, and then that usually meant going to another platforming and puzzle thing. Again, that rhythm and giving you a little bit of everything, which this game really does. Like I complain about wanting more third-person shooter aspects, but I mean, if you look at the gunplay and the combat, including melee opportunities and just going fisticuffs with dudes, exploration, the puzzle solving, the platforming, and then integrating cutscenes that aren't too intrusive or long. This game and then also piloting a boat for a little while, getting to pilot the Jeep a few times. Like, this game gives you a lot. And it doesn't feel like it's trying to give you everything. Like, oh, look over here. We do this too. It's kind of good at everything. And I love that, because I look at things like, what did we play? Mass Effect, those moon buggy scenes.
Oh God, yeah.
Like where it's like one bit of gameplay.
Mako. That's what it was called, the Mako.
Right. Yeah. It's so great. And then another could be so like just dreadful. So this game, the fact that it gives you all that is awesome. And it was so cool to see them improve on the combat. I think the combat's very fluid. I think it just like it was very smooth. I found using explosives was more useful this time, because I complained about that in past iterations where it was like, what is the point of using the propane tanks or the grenades? This time, the dynamite and the grenades were actually effective, and I found them useful in getting out enemies because dudes would hide. And especially the more powerful enemies, the more armored enemies, the explosives came in handy. I had so much fun with the combat. I know it's not known for its third-person shooter prowess compared to games that are built on that, but it's so enjoyable. And I think they actually even made it a little better this time, which was cool to see.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's really fun to play. It gets a little, maybe it's just because I was playing on hard, but a little bit of grenade spam, which annoys the shit out of me. I hate grenade spam. But because they want to flush you out, like they want to make you fight.
Yeah, they want you to move.
Right, and I totally get it. And I'm like very deliberate, especially with, like you said, regenerative health, which has become so much more common in the last, Uncharted's always had it, but that there was always a split between like Doom where you don't, or Wolfenstein where there's not regenerative health, and then games like later Call of Duty games and others that kind of embrace that. But yeah, it's fun to play, and it's, as I noted earlier, the combat seems to be balanced enough where there are stages where all you're doing is fighting, but I think that there's a really nice pace and a really nice difference between moments, letting moments breathe, set pieces. It's not so obvious. I make fun of Gears of War for this, and I also made fun of the older Uncharted games when you're going through an area and like everything is waist high, and you're like, all right, well, I'm going to come back through this area, and we're obviously going to have a fight here. This is a little less obvious with that, but there's still places like that. The one thing that I love, though, is just that for the first time, I think the game introduces just crazy verticality with the fights and the ability to just move, like constantly move and swing around, hide, get the drop on people, attack them from, I don't know if you like attack them from the rope and attack them from the top. Like Drake does all these melee attacks now, which are really cool. So it's fun. Very kinetic. It feels very different and it's very fun. But I do love the idea that the stealth introduces for the very first time in Uncharted non-violence. And that's a big thing for me in games. Not that I care very much in most games. Like I'm playing Dead Space right now. I'm fucking destroying everything. It's awesome. But it's cool that a game has a mind for that. It adds a little bit of that gameplay agency that makes, I think, bigger open world role-playing games really shine, where you can kind of play by your own rules. Fallout's going to have you do whatever you want ultimately, but you could just play it as non-violently as you can figure out how to do it. And I think a game kind of introducing a little bit of that style is good, because that's the kind of non-linearity I would like to see. Having a huge set piece where you can get around it in 5 different ways and go through it and fight in that's the kind of non-linearity that Uncharted needs, not the non-linearity of putting me in a Jeep. And I mean, let's be honest, right? This is just game design. This is the game design reality. When they figured out that Jeep, they're like, how can we use it again? When they figured out the boat, how can we use it again? When they figure out the slide, you're going to slide all game. You're going to be swinging around on a constant basis. Like they figure these things out. And like you say, Naughty Dog doesn't try to go in many different directions. They just choose a few things here. That's why I say I feel like this is Mega Man 2, 3, and 4 all rolled up into one.
I love that.
Because it feels like they've done all these things at once, but it all does kind of work out. And there's no doubt that there's a lot of fun. What was your favorite weapon? Or any weapons stick out to you?
You know what? I didn't really this time dislike any weapons. I felt like they were all effective. Some of them are a little more accurate. Some of them have a wilder kickback where, you recover a little off from where you were aiming initially. But I liked them all. I was kind of playing with all of them. The sniper rifle came in really handy at certain sections. I liked having the Uzi as a handgun. I thought that was a cool touch because you could essentially have 2 machine guns at once, which I thought was neat. The RPG was very satisfying when you finally get
China
to
Lake
that later on.
Oh, the RPG and the China Lake grenade launcher, right?
The grenade launcher was so fun. There was really no egregious bad choices. Like I would really kind of just jump through and, try a little bit of everything. And it seemed like there were different, again, that game design where those thoughtful aspects where it's like some weapons were just better for certain sections and you could experiment. And of course, in this game, you're able to continue infinitely from, I think, very generous progress markers. So if one thing's not working, you have an opportunity to try something else. Oh, here come those armored dudes with the Gatling guns. I know I got to shoot their helmets off. So let me try this gun this time. I keep getting obliterated. Let me give this a shot. And again, that's where it feels like maybe it's a little too easy because it's very liberal, where they kind of give you infinite chances. They're like, you fucked up, do it again from right here. You don't have to go back to the beginning of the level like in the old days. I know that's a big part of games now, and that's a big part of the conversation. But yeah, the weapons were super fun. And again, not giving you too much, where it's like, I don't know what to do with all this. Like, not sloppily saying like, we're just going to throw all this shit in there, just enough to get the job done and, maintain a little realism and just have fun with it.
Yeah, it's fun. You're right. The PS5 especially makes it so quick getting back into the game that it makes you want to take more risks in combat and try different things. Yeah, the armored enemies, the shotgun enemies are annoying because they're so aggressive. But the armored guys, I would just like throw 2 or 3 grenades at them, and then just open fire at them and just hope for the best. Just show myself. I really like the Copperhead. I think that was like my go-to weapon when I saw it, just because I felt like it was the best of both worlds. It was a good assault rifle, but it had a little bit of a zoom, and I think it's Shoreline's mercenary weapon. So you see it in those particular sections of the game. And I like in the Libertalia sections, or in the sections where there are pirates, where you can find flintlocks, which just fucking obliterate the enemies.
One shot them. No matter where you hit them on their body, they were dead. It's
pretty cool. So I did like that, although it only had, I think, 1 bullet or 2 bullets at a time. A couple other things I wanted to talk about. One particular moment I wanted to call out. We have to get to the overall story, of course, which we haven't done yet, almost 2 hours in, but and I want to ask you about it. But I really loved the Madagascar sequence for one particular reason, which was the exploration of slow and fast, and using the same settings for a little bit of an immersive exposition, and then for just a crazy adventure chase. And so I really loved the scene when you're walking through that village. You can feel the humanity in that scene, in the marketplace. He's pushing through guys. You can actually talk to some of the vendors and buy things from them. I don't know if you did that. You can buy like a compass that's of dubious quality from one of these guys.
The compass I didn't see.
It's actually one of the treasures, and you have to go and go and buy it from him, and you have to talk him down, talk his price down and stuff like that. So there's like interesting things like that keep you busy. And so you see a lot of the humanity, a lot of the sights and sounds and all of that. But then, not unlike other Uncharted games in similar situations, you find yourself getting out of Dodge, but you're doing it this time in a Jeep. And you were talking about the design and this. I was most impressed with the visual language and the design of the game during that section, which, as I understand that section of the game, when you're in the Jeep chase through the town and going crazy, that entire section, as I understand it, as sections in games was cordoned off and given to a team to do. Like, this is what you're doing, this Makes part sense. Of the game. And it's incredible. There's so much attention to detail, and it is so unnecessary. So much work is put into these sections compared to other sections. And I wanted to just shout that out. I love how you get to kind of experience it slowly, and then suddenly you experience it frenetically. Yet you always, as you said earlier, seem to know where to go. You very rarely get stuck. When I was getting chased in the slower sections with the gun turret or whatever, I was going down the wrong street sometimes. But when the game's going really fast, you feel like you can make a mistake at any time. But I think the game's smart enough, and the designers are smart enough to know you don't want to make a mistake right now. Like, just let people play it. It feels adventurous. I love when he grapples onto the train, and it's like so cool. It's just so fast and Indiana Jones-esque. I really had to give a shout out to that section because I really loved it. But I wanted to ask you about the overall kind of story of this idea of Henry Avery's $400 million treasure that ultimately leads to the unexpected discovery of a pirate society, which ultimately leads to the discovery of a civil war in this pirate society, which ultimately leads to the discovery of another pirate city. When you first walk into Libertalia, I remember saying to myself, Micah was watching me play. She'd played it, I think, before, but I was like, holy shit, I totally forgot about this. And in my mind, I'm like, I forgot all about this place. This is so awesome. And those next few chapters, when you're going through Libertalia into the Treasury, and then you go into New Devon and you're going through all the kind of Victorian, pre-Victorian really built. I mean, they're not Victorian, they're more colonial style buildings, and all the, like you said, the furniture and all the letters you're finding and all the discoveries you're making. It is good shit. Some of the best video game setting and ambience I've ever seen. Beautiful. And ever experienced it. Absolutely loved it. So tell me a little bit about how you feel about this story of Henry Avery and his band of pirates that end up turning on one another.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great backstory to have. I just love the whole thing of like making this band of pirates, because you usually think of a pirate, they're kind of off on their own, right? They're sort of mavericks. They go solo. They have their fleet, and it's their fleet, their galleon against the world. So having this band of pirates and the power in that would be super awesome, I think. And because, you think these guys would be vying with like the Spanish fleet, like the Spanish Armada and shit like that. So to have like a force of their own would be really cool. Like the whole strength in numbers with the pirate thing was something new and kind of a refreshing angle for me. And then to have like this pirate Eden, like this pirate utopia, which I saw as like this secret place where they could go and live and, have their lives, but also hide. And just the inherent opulence of the whole thing, because these guys are loaded. They steal treasure for a living. Like, I love seeing the wealth reflected in what they've built and just having a place where it's like a city. It's like a proper city just for pirates, not just for a country, not just for a certain peoples, the Spanish, the French, the English, but for pirates. I thought that was fascinating. And yeah, obviously it looks beautiful. And then, this thing was this amazing, the amazing wealth. And again, the opulence and the riches 300 years ago, but it's in shambles now. So you have this once glorious city just being reclaimed by nature with the vines and the roots and the flowers and the mildew and the moss. It's just really gorgeous on both levels. Which was actually really just, it made for a proper payoff set piece. Like, that's really what you're working to get to, and it rewards you. It's like, wow, not only that, but you get to explore it. You really get to see it inside and out. And you said something earlier, Kyle, which was really, I think, part of the magnificence of this whole thing of being in this place, which is the vertical. How high everything ascends, almost like skyscrapers, but this was stuff from the 1700s. So, and then the way it gets into engineering and technology, where these guys were making skyways and elevators, and how much money they could throw at everything, not only into everything being in Boston gold and the most beautiful trappings you could imagine, but also just the money that they put into creating, engineering, and inventing this place was really cool. It was a nice kind of wash between something fantastic and storybook and something that felt like it could have been real. And that's what I wanted to ask you, actually. How much of this is something I didn't get a chance to research, but I wish I really got a chance to look into it. How much of this is based on real people, real historical figures in the pirates, in, sort of their escapades and all that kind of stuff? I know Uncharted has loosely hung its hat on, loosely based legends or fiction. Some of it's fiction, some of it's loosely based on actual history. But how much of this was true with Avery and Thomas too and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know anything about these guys at all. I don't know much about piracy, or I've never really been very interested in pirates for some reason. I don't know why. They're very cool.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
cool shit.
the age of exploration and that whole kind of era of seaborne chicanery going on all over the world is I know more about it than probably the average person, but not nearly as much about it as I should about other things. And that's the same with we were talking about with the other Uncharted games. Like I don't know very much about Francis Drake and Elizabeth I and all that kind of stuff either. And so yeah, I don't know. I imagine like other things, like you said, it's predicated on real people obviously doing very fake things. And I think one of the cool things about it is that we were talking earlier about the state going after, a bad actor. And you would think in a situation like this where they're largely robbing state ships and corporations like
Sure. Yeah.
in this kind of broken economic system where they're, in this mercantile kind of situation where governments are very heavily involved. So you'd think that people would be in great danger, and they were in great danger. Pirates were in great danger. Governments started hiring pirates to go after pirates. Those were called privateers. And they were basically state sanctioned pirates that could work on behalf of, basically fighting pirates, acting like a pirate on behalf of the state. And you would think that some guys like this would draw their ire, not those privateers and pirates necessarily, but the state's ire. And so you would think that they would figure out where they were and went after them, but that's not what happened at all. They turn on themselves. And I love this idea of corruption, of just the wealth and the power even corrupts these kind of libertines.
Sure.
that first kind of segregate themselves into two separate groups of like the founders and the haves and the have-nots basically, and then all turn on each other as well. And so I love that, again, it's a little bit of an unbalanced and different sort of story where maybe you would expect there to be some sort of different consequence, but the consequence actually came from within. Certainly a really interesting anecdote for a lot of things where the rot comes from within and not from without. So what did you think about this idea? I love the notion of them turning on each other being kind of introduced when you're going to the Treasury and you're seeing evidence of war. There's like spears stuck in people, dudes hanging in trees, and then you go into the Treasury after exploring a lot of Libertalia, which is cool. You see like there's like a blacksmith. You go into a pub where you can actually have conversation with Sam and do all these other things. But you get to this point and you find it emptied. And what I think is cool is that there are paintings of all the founding pirates, and there's just written on them or painted on them as thief.
Love that.
On each of them. And it introduces this idea that something happened. What did you think about this kind of not only finding the pirate utopia, but finding it, in its last moments under duress?
Yeah, it's so cool to know, like, yeah, you get it in increments as you explore it deeper. It's like at first it's like this band of pirates that come together, all these people that, work to defy the law. They're going to come together to form their own thing. Then you learn that they pair off and there's a civil war breaks out until it's down to two. And then they betray each other. So that whole overarching theme of greed corrupts all. Ultimately, there's no escape from it. And the way that plays into our heroes too, that, once it gets its meat hooks in you, and I think for Sam and Nate, especially, it was for a different purpose. It wasn't just for the sheer riches. It was the thrill seeking. It was the adventure. But that whole overarching theme of, seeing this pirate utopia formed and then disintegrate, and how you learn more and more about that through just exploring these places and how brutal it was. So it's fantastic, but it does make sense, right? These guys are pirates. They're all about that. Like, this probably wasn't going to end well once it started.
That's true. And I like how it makes itself evident. It's, first of all, it's again, the suspension of disbelief. How did no one find this place? How did no one see this place? It's not like it's in the Amazon or something where you could conceivably imagine many things being hidden. It's not that overgrown in Madagascar, but not even close. But nonetheless, you're right. And there's this great flexing of, like you said, engineering. I love the idea, actually, that they explore. I don't know. It struck me as something that might have been added into the writing later. But who knows? This idea of like, did they just spend all their money? Is the whole mystery going to be that they have nothing left because they built this huge place? But it wasn't that. Although that's an interesting theory, that they dispel in the story itself. And we'll talk about the ending later. But I was curious what you thought about this idea of New Devon and this kind of separatist colony of even more ostentatious living, very beautiful mansions and all the rest here. And it ultimately culminates in this great scene. I think maybe one of the most visually stunning scenes in the entire game, where they walk into the dining room and all the skeletons of the pirates are all sitting there except for two of them. And that's before they go into the mines and all the rest. I love that scene. I love that shot. I think it's super cool. What do you think about this? Yeah, this culmination and this kind of ratcheting up of this civil war that again leads to all their deaths.
Yeah. So what was it for me? What was it? Libertalia versus New Devon? Is that how the Civil War played out? Like the separatists formed their own thing, right?
Yeah.
So
as I see it, I mean, I think this might be in some of the notes that you read too. And some of the notes that you read are from people that are coming here afterwards trying to figure it out, which I think is cool too. So that plays into like this whole idea of like like Nadine says, everyone's dying for this treasure. But as I understand it, they all kind of have this credo that is then, I guess, because the inference is that these guys are like the big names that brought in the big money and they kind of have created their own country and their own colony, that they basically have taken all that shit and gone to another town, which is like a castle town, basically. And so the treasury as found by Drake and Sam is the way that I think the rebels found the treasury in whatever civil war happened there.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I don't know how much further that arc goes, because then I think the arc picks up that the guys that are still in New Devon all end up turning on one another instead. So I think that's the tract, but I could be wrong.
That seems right. Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, I wanted to confirm that with you. Yeah, that because it does get kind of complicated. Because and you learn more as you explore deeper into that whole area. But I love the way it culminates in that sort of giant room with the pirates sitting along there. The Knights of the Round Table, as it were. And the skeleton. There's something just so cool about skeleton pirates. And then the way that whole thing culminates in the explosive, the gunpowder laden skeletons underground, the explosives and the paranoia. That's kind of what was cool with the pirates, because they that's their life. They're treacherous by nature, right? So you could see these guys being extremely paranoid. So just the infrastructure that they built, from those explosive laden caves to those cliffs with, bristling with cannons. And you could see like Libertalia is it looks like it's built inside of like a mountain range, basically in the ocean, like in the shallows or whatever. Just the whole nature of the whole thing, because they have such a treacherous nature that everything built was to protect everything that they made, but then it was all destroyed from within. I love the irony of that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I'm reading my notes, so I think the order is actually the front gates, like with the cages and the spears and stuff, is actually in the front of the gates of New Devon. So it does reach, I guess, the walls at least of their their encampment. And I think this is when they're trying to escape, because when you're going there, you realize that the pirates all scuttled their ships, which is also interesting, and abandoned them.
Great point.
And so there's like this plan afoot that you're kind of like trying to put together, and the plan ultimately backfires on all of them. But yeah, very beautifully done, and I loved it as well. And I must say this before we move on, is that I also wanted to just point out visually and from a gameplay perspective that marooned chapter, which leads into finding your way to Libertalia. It's beautiful. Again, the weather changing as time goes on is really subtle, but it happens if you pay attention. Like as the scenes go on, like the weather's getting worse and worse.
It's so good, dude.
And I love it looks beautiful on PS5 especially, but I'm sure it does on PS4 too, is just his soaking clothes. Like the wetness of his clothes and the rain effects look amazing. And I like how he doesn't play right. Like you can't make him move quickly. He needs to reach and hold for things as he's climbing up. It's a totally different way of playing. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah, he's trembling.
Mm.
You can know he's cold. He's extremely exhausted. Yeah, that was brilliant. It's frustrating because you're frustrated for Nate. You're the one pulling the puppet strings. But yeah, it's awesome. It really is immersive.
So we have to talk about two scenes in particular, three scenes really. We have to talk about the final flashback before the ending, which we have to talk about as well, which is the fight between Drake and Rafe. And then we have to talk about the epilogue. So I want to talk first of all about Cassandra Morgan. What do you think about this revelation about her, that she was kind of like an adventurer archaeologist working for this wealthy woman who funded things, and she had all these ideas. And it's interesting. I love that chapter, just exploring the mansion and then the woman being home, the woman dying, which is very dark because I guess the assumption is that, and they're seen. So, and that's why they have to take on new names, which is where the Nathan Drake name comes from, which is cool. But, well, I'll leave it there. What do you think about this whole thing?
It's awesome. I love the fact that they're creating a Drake legacy. They're expanding it for us so we get a little bit more of where these guys came from, and just finding out that these two apples didn't land too far from the tree. That passion for history was handed down. Their mom worked for this sort of wealthy benefactor that, allowed her, if she wasn't a treasure hunter, she was at least very avid with history and, basically it sounds like more of an archaeologist than a straight up adventurer. But I love the whole way you introduced the Evelyn character, who was like the enabler for the Cassandra character. And then, just learning a little more. I thought that particular sequence of exploring the mansion, and I think very early later on when Nate and Sam get into Libertalia and that exploring sequence, I thought those were two of the most boring sequences in the game. And again, I have to be mindful of, I'm constantly clamoring for the combat. Because I just enjoy it so much. But that being said, I thought that place, I love seeing young Nate and young Sam, but I thought that sequence played out a little too long. And it dragged for me a little bit. I'm not sure how that worked out for you, Kyle. But I love the history and just learned the world building and learning a little bit more about the characters and the origins. And it was cool. You can't really end Uncharted without talking about the parents, at least one of them, right? So that seemed like a fitting thing to do in this game. But that sequence was boring for me. Did you have the same, did it resonate the same way for you, or were you cool with it?
No, I was cool with it in the sense that I feel like it's one of the most important scenes in all of the Uncharted games, because you learn about the obsession with Francis Drake and where they discovered that, and taking the name and why they abandoned their names and what their real names were. I mean, Nate is Nate Morgan, presumably.
That's cool to find out.
And so, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And it is I think it's an interesting time to put it in the game. The nonlinear storytelling allows those chapters to really be anywhere in the story. And so you could imagine that being maybe earlier, but, yeah, I had no problem with it. I mean, the only problem with it I have is just kind of the escape thing. Like, why did the woman have to die? And they changed their names and all of that because they're kind of on the lam. It's kind of dark. I mean, it gets pretty dark. That like Drake and they're wanted men basically, and they know who they are. Like that's why I say like they see them and go after them. So
and they didn't do anything.
No, and they didn't. That's the thing is that's why it's so at that moment you have to think, well, you're going to make your choice now. You either face the music and try to convince these people you had nothing to do with it and you were breaking in. I think you can make that case.
Absolutely.
I think you can make the case. And you can do an autopsy on the woman to feel like, just be like, well, go do an autopsy on her. What do we do to her?
Right. They might have locked him up for a couple of days.
She has a gun.
They would have found out.
She has the gun. Right. Her fingerprints are on the gun. I would just have called the cops immediately. But obviously they were breaking in and they're obviously used to being in trouble. So it's a little bit different. For me, I would have been all tongue tied and been like, oh my God.
It was good shit though, because they came to an understanding and then she died. So she couldn't explain to the police. So you're absolutely right. They had a choice to make. But for me, my heart went out because these are already kind of victims of the system and they don't want to go back. You know what I mean? I mean, they're not in prison yet, but they have that life of captivity anyway in the orphanage and all that kind of stuff. They don't. So, and, maybe mixed in there with an inherent distrust for adults and all that kind of stuff. So they did they made the decision, they did that kid thing of like, we're going to run even though we're not guilty. It was just good storytelling. It was like, oh shit, really? That's going to happen now? And that whole sequence of running from the cops and the way that whole thing is orchestrated was really fun and really a creative touch. I thought like, you're going away, the cop car's pulling up, you have to zig and zag and follow Sam. That was really a fun bit.
Yeah, for sure. I dug it too. And I guess the assumption is that Drake doesn't have any proper education after the 5th or 6th grade, I guess, something like that. I mean, pretty dark. Because, when Sully finds him, they're in fucking South America, aren't they? Or
That's
Europe
right,
or something
if you think
like
of that. That's right. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the end sequence, the ship. Again, like you said, very reminiscent of the Goonies for sure. And I love it, the ostentatious wealth on the ship. Like, so it confirms that the money still exists, and so at least some of the money exists. That they have obviously spent an enormous amount of the treasure that they've pirated elsewhere to create this place to begin with. I must say though, so my lasting memory of Uncharted 4 from the original playthrough, that rush playthrough in 2016, was the last boss fight and how much I hated it. And that kind of came back to me in this, where I'm like, I hate this fight. And I actually was reading about it. I'm like, what is going on here? Am I just bad at this? Like, why can't I do this? And then I read a tip where it's like, if you just mash the buttons basically while it's happening, like you'll just...
Did that work?
Yeah, it worked. It's totally fine. So that's what made it easier. It's just like, because you have like one triangle and circle or square, I think, are the two choices. And so it's just like mashing them both.
That exactly.
It kind of does the trick if you can manage to do that and kind of navigate.
That's interesting. I didn't even
try that.
With the
claw kind of going and whatever.
Okay.
But ultimately I got through it. I don't know what they were really thinking with that. I just don't think... I think a final confrontation is cool, but I would have hoped that they learned in Uncharted 2 with that Lazarevich fight. Like, you really don't need boss fights, and it's actually the worst part of your games. Like, the Lazarevich fight in Uncharted 2 is obnoxious. And this is not
good.
Quite that annoying, but I just don't understand... We don't need a confrontation like this. It's cool. They're using the swords that the pirates kill themselves with. They're on the ship. It's burning. All the gold's around them. I get it. It's very cool. But to me, that could have just been a confrontation or a cutscene. I don't like when games feel like they have to culminate in some sort of fight. I know it's a video game. I know it's an adventure. But it seemed a little on the nose for me. And so that it still bothered me this time through again. And I'm also not that compelled by Rafe. I just was like, I don't give a fuck about this guy. We don't really see him very much.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
So it does. I don't think the stakes are like nearly as high either. What did you think about that whole sequence?
Yeah, he's not a big bad that you're really pining for to see his comeuppance. You know what I mean? We don't really feel that strongly about him either way. So again, that doesn't really help. I thought, it was nice to get on the galleon. It was really a cool payoff to see the piles and the hoard of treasure, the gold coins and the rubies and the emerald encrusted chalices and all that kind of stuff. To see everything, it's like, whoa, like that sparkling, finery. That was cool to see all that. Like it almost like, something you would see a dragon sitting on top of. It was cool to see all that in one place. But yeah, that last fight was really anticlimactic for me too. Certainly not a strength in the game. It looks like now Uncharted has sort of a history of that. I would have liked to have done something like, I know the melee combat, the hand-to-hand combat is not very intricate in this game, so I'm not sure, but I would have rather, if we were going to do a sword fight, let me have a crack at it rather than doing the button thing with the triangle and the circle. And I realized it was mostly staggered. Like it was mostly back and forth to block his parries, to block his sword thrusts. But if you missed one, I would just hit the button again because I realized I could just go back and forth. So once I landed one, I would just hit the opposite and so on and so forth. But I still had a little trouble with it, interestingly enough. But it's just, I understand it's more dramatic than a proper gameplay playoff. Like, I would rather do something. I would have rather figured out, like, maybe you're fighting him in a melee style and platforming and eventually figure out you have to cut the treasure down on your own for it to land on him. Like, once you realize, like, okay, this sword fight's not going anywhere. We're not gaining any steam. I would have rather had a larger role to play where it feels like the other combat sections of the game. It's not a quick time event, but it's close. I don't really like that. It doesn't age well. And it did remind me of previous experiences with Uncharted. And again, like you said, Rafe isn't that compelling of a character. We get a little bit of Nadine at the end too, where we get the double cross, triple cross thing where, it seems like, it's a Mexican standoff time, but there's a lot of that throughout the game. I think that's part of the ride. So yeah, not the best, but thank God that's not the end of the game. It's just the end of that's partially the end, but it's not, we'll go into better things. There's a better ending than
I don't think it sticks in my craw because of that very reason that we get more later.
Perfect.
So let's go into the epilogue. Were you surprised by this? This wasn't spoiled for you, I assume. And I mean, talk to me about the whole thing, however you want to take it.
Not spoiled at all. Yeah, I was super happy to see this because it shows that Nate really stuck to his guns this time. He left the life. It was really cool to see them buy Jamison's salvage company. And, starting and really doubling down on that, Nate's going to stick with it this time because they have a daughter who looks like a preteen. And to know that not only did Nate double down on getting out of the life and settling down with Elena and honoring his commitments, but also the fact that there's going to be a legacy or a potential legacy, but you think it's going to be a legacy. And then other small details that are very satisfying. You had mentioned earlier, Kyle, like the fact that you see the letters and the photo with Sully, like Sullivan's still in their life. And it looks like, they have a nice life. They have a beautiful house on the beach with a boat, a sailboat, and they have a family now. But I think the most exciting part of that is that it looks like the story may go on with the Drake offspring in Cassie. And also the little nod to just being the mom's namesake, Cassandra, Cassie, and that whole thing. And you know what I realized in the end too? And again, this is craft. This is thoughtful storytelling. This is how you make a game. In the marketplace earlier on, you were talking about buying things from the various merchants and everything like that. You could buy an apple from a peddler on the street. And as they're walking around, as Nate and Victor are walking around that bazaar or whatever, Nate eats his apple as he's walking. And it's really cool, really kind of nuanced detail where the apple gets more and more eaten as he walks and stuff. And then they echo that with the apple in the end with Cassie. She picks up an apple and eats it. So even small details are echoed and come full circle and make sense. And you know what I mean? Like there's a question and answer. Everything is bookended. And it's very tidy and it's very thoughtful. But that was the best part for me, was not only getting to walk around and play as this character for a little bit, but realizing like the story may go on with this character. I thought if it had to end, this would be a very satisfying end. Before I turn it over to you, let me ask you, because you may know this. When they did Uncharted 4 and it came out in 2016, did they confirm then that this was going to be the last one? Because it seems like they were fixing to wrap things up. And this seems like it could have been, question mark, no question mark, period, exclamation point. This is the end of it.
Yeah, I think at the time, because Amy had been gone and there was really no steward there anymore for it, I think that they were putting it to bed for at least a little while. I don't think it was as explicit as it has now been made that they're not going to make another one. Right. Because remember, when Uncharted 4 came out, there was still The Lost Legacy, which hadn't been announced and they were making. So they weren't really able to, they're not done yet, technically, at this part in their timeline, not until the next year.
Okay.
The lemur thing is funny, or not the lemur, the apple thing. I wanted to tell you with there's another meta to that, another level to that apple sequence with Victor and Drake, and I only know this because I got a trophy for it. Which is if you walk down a certain path after buying the apple, a lemur comes and steals the apple from you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And
I didn't see that. That sucks. I missed that.
But you can restart any of the chapters and see it if you want, if you're interested. I'm sure there's YouTube videos of it too, but wanted to throw that out there. And yeah, as far as the ending is concerned, I thought it was wonderful. I think it's a really emotional and interesting ending. I like how first of all, we know that Sam and Sully are together, which is interesting. And so that plays in maybe in the future, we'll see. And I'm thinking that, I don't know that you had mentioned earlier that could like Sully be kind of like the wheelman still. And I'm like, I don't know, like this is 15 years after the events of the game, I think. So he's pretty old now. And you can actually see he's got like some of the black spots on his face in the picture. And
yeah.
He's
he
like
looks
just looking
older.
getting a little aged.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, how he'll play in the future. Obviously, they have a close relationship, but I love that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in that she's getting up to mischief. She's going through her father's shit and finding all of these things that he put away. And
great point.
And I dig that, and I like how they catch her, and it seems like she's going to get away with it, but then they kind of nail her and have her dead to rights, and she admits what she found, and telling them not to be mad and all that, and they start telling them stories, and it's good. It's good stuff. And again, it's what I love about it is it's not because she opens it and finds glittering gold and jewels and amazing things, but rather the things that were important to him, like his holster and pictures and, you know, all these kinds of things. I love that. I thought it was really, really neat. Like what he treasures most and like what he was hiding away from the world and keeping safe was none of those things, but rather, you know, I'm sure some of that stuff's very valuable, but it wasn't really like the skull and all those kinds of things. He's not keeping those things for any other reason than that they're nostalgic and remind him of his great adventures, and something he's kept hidden and he's had to keep hidden because it's funny. It's like, man, how do you keep this hidden from your daughter? It's like, you got to keep this hidden from your daughter. This shit is straight up crazy. What happened? Like, this is illegal. She's like, oh, you know, she says something about nice holster, dad, or whatever. And then sees him with the shotgun. And it's like, man, this was a different time. We got a lot to tell you. If you really want to know what's going on, she's got to like join. She's got to be old enough to absorb that. She's in the adventurer life already. She cares about the same things like antiquities and archaeology that they care about and salvage and all of that. So, yeah, and now that we have the context, totally coincidental that trailer was released in the days leading up to us doing this. But now that we have confirmation, I mean, I knowing what I know, and I like about video, and I'm not saying I know anything about the situation. I don't know who's making. I'm telling you, I don't know. But knowing what I know about video games and knowing what I know about Sony and their very intentional and deliberate way they do things, this is absolutely teasing Uncharted. Like, there's just no other thing it could be.
It absolutely seems like that.
Yeah. And I think it's fucking dope. I mean, and some people I think are like, well, now is it going to get a little too close to Tomb Raider? And I'm like, well, no, I think these are two different things. As long as Tomb Raider is really good. Like the reimagined Crystal Dynamics Tomb Raider trilogy that began, I think in 2013, 14, something like that. Okay. No, it was earlier than that. Maybe even 2012. Okay. It's good, really good. And I played all three of them and I liked them a lot. But they're a little bit different. They're much more modern in their trappings, like their side quests and collectible gear and all these kinds of things. Like Uncharted does a really nice job of. That's why I'm so surprised about the open areas. They do such a nice job of being like, we're not even doing stats, no upgrades, none of it. That even The Last of Us absorbs and does with vitamins and gears that you find for your guns and all these different things. So I feel like there's a lot of promise for them to hopefully stay the course. Not Naughty Dog, but whoever's making this new game, stay the course and make something like this. High production, high value, high budget, and high production value. Really fun to play. 15 to 20 hours about Cassie Drake. I think that people would really love that. The only unfortunate thing is that it inherently spoils the end of the fourth game. But I think that they've given people enough time to have absorbed that. There's just no other way to do it now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well... Yeah, I guess. Yeah, right. No, I mean, it does inherently spoil it. It's interesting, Kyle. Like, there's something on one hand that's so elegant about actually ending Uncharted here and just ending on a high note. We talk about this a lot on the show. Ending on a really high note, never jumping the shark, and just leaving the rest up to our imaginations. There's something so bittersweet but wonderful about that, you know, and just really ending with that elegance. But on the other hand, Uncharted is just too good to let go. Like, I think the other half of me says risk jumping the shark. I want to return to this world vis-a-vis this other character. It's like too wonderful of a world not to return to. And you have really, you have a great vehicle to do that through this new character and through maybe Sam as the mentor. And of course, Nathan could be, you know, somewhere in this, you know, somewhere embedded in this world. And you could have Sully as like the Alfred, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He works back at the house, serves drinks, smokes a cigar or whatever. But, you know, in all seriousness, I think I'm more edging towards quote unquote risking it and continuing it. But there is something I have to agree. I have to really admit that there's something really elegant about just leaving it where it is and letting it exist in our imaginations. I think that also takes a lot of discipline. And I wonder too with that, like how much of that assessment is leaving or not leaving money on the table, business decisions, rights, all of that. You know, I understand it's more complicated than just podcasting about would it be cool versus, versus not being cool. But it's interesting that it could happen. I like that it looks like it is happening, and I'm excited to see what they do with it. I understand it's not the type of thing that they're going to handle badly. Like it's Uncharted. You have to handle it thoughtfully. So I'm not really that worried about it falling into the wrong hands or, messing it up.
Yes. I think Sony as a family of studios, PlayStation Studios, is becoming much more comfortable with sharing games amongst each other as long as there's like some sort of production element that stays with the home studio. So what I mean by that is I think part of the reason that Santa Monica or that Ready at Dawn's God of War games on PSP were so successful is in part because they were really shepherded by Sony Santa Monica in some production level, some correspondence and some sort of like cross-pollination between the studios, especially being in the same place. And so I feel like with Uncharted, it's probably going to be something like another team doing it with Naughty Dog having consultation rights on it, because Sony's studios do well enough where it seems like Sony has given them a level of ownership over their own IP that wasn't there to begin with. So the example I always use in this regard is Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch, of course, made Sly Cooper, and then they made Infamous, and then they made Ghost of Tsushima. And Sly Cooper 4 was made by another studio, not Sucker Punch, but Sanzaru, which is now owned by Meta. And that kind of thing would never happen now, I don't think, because not without the blessing of Sucker Punch, because Sucker Punch has become so powerful. And in fact, in correspondence released by Sucker Punch in last fall, they said, like, we're not working on Infamous or Sucker Punch, or Infamous or Sly Cooper. No one is. Oh. And it's like basically taking ownership over that. So I think, in other words, I think there's a give and take. Like, I think if Uncharted is going to be visited or revisited, then I think it's going to be done with a lot of deliberate care. The real question becomes, can it be done without Amy Hennig? Because even though Amy wasn't part of the end result of this, she was part of the embryonic state, and a lot of these different elements were there with her doing the game. Now, people look at Golden Abyss, the Uncharted game on Vita that wasn't made by Naughty Dog, but she did have consultation on it, and so did Naughty Dog as well, and they're credited in the game's credits. So I think that they had some sort of say over the way it went and how it fit and all of the rest. So I look at this and I think it's probably dollars to know it's going to be great, but I think that there are lingering questions about being totally detached from its heritage and if that's good or healthy or even necessary. But I have been playing with this idea, Dag, and I'm curious what you think of this as we close. Is I often talk about on the show about how I want Sony to let its studios take risks. And this is a kind of myopic desire in a lot of ways because it doesn't really make sense. Risks are good, and sometimes they come out in Uncharted itself was a risk. And so was The Last of Us and a lot of other games. But when a game sells 20 million copies, there's obviously people out there that want more of it. And you almost look at it as a corporation and a creative entity being like, who are we to say that there's no way this can continue when we're selling this many copies? Like it's kind of dumb, right? And in some way, not because I care about the bean counting at Sony, but because the money made in these games will allow other risks to be taken. And the hope is that we can have in this ecosystem a number of very successful God of War, Uncharted-like, Spider-Man-like success stories, or Horizon even, where these allow trickle-down effects of creative forces being leveraged in other places that otherwise wouldn't be, perhaps by those very teams. And I think Uncharted will be okay. I think the template will be what's going on with Horizon, specifically now that we know that there are probably 2, if not 3 Horizon games in development, not at Guerrilla. We think that one of them is at NCSoft, like an MMO. One we know is at Firesprite, and that's the VR game Call of the Mountain. And then there's the presumed remake of Horizon Zero Dawn that might very well be at a studio like Nix's. So clearly there's trust between all of those things, those entities, and there's a creative process. In addition to the TV show, I think the Netflix got Horizon. So hopefully they don't beat a dead horse, but I think it's time for Uncharted to come back. And I think that if the game, people are asking like, oh, when do I think the game will be revealed and stuff? And I'm like, well, I studied the trailer as a scholar of PlayStation. And what I see are all games that are not only known, but released, except for 2 of them. Final Fantasy 16 is one of those games. And I think Hogwarts or something was the other one. Okay. But then there's this inclusion of, no, it wasn't Hogwarts. It's Spider-Man and Final Fantasy 16. So big PS5 games. And then this inclusion, this very deliberate 2 quick shots of who I clearly think is Cassie Drake. And I think that suggests, if you look at the games, that suggests that it's going to be announced soon and might be closer than we think. I mean, I don't think it's this year, but 2024, I think is totally possible.
It's exciting prospect.
Yeah, so it'll be very interesting. And if it comes out in 2024, it will have been 8 years since Uncharted 4 and 7 since The Lost Legacy. So we'll find out. But I think more Uncharted, very welcome, in my opinion. It's just one of those series. They just have to figure out a way to keep it fresh and don't lose sight of its airiness and its campiness, and that there are no consequences and all of that. You got to kind of keep it pulpy and fun. I think they can do that.
I think so. Just don't make, and I wouldn't fear it being too similar to Tomb Raider just because of the protagonist's age alone. It really kind of sets it apart. As long as you don't do anything stupid like she's vying against Rafe's son to, the other 12-year-old that's, they're vying for the same, I don't know. Maybe that's funny, but don't make any egregious decisions.
Be in her 20s. That's probably what it looks like to me. And that's probably around the age that Laura was when she first started.
You think she's aged up a little bit?
I think so.
Those are quick clips. So
I would imagine she's an adult.
To examine that. Yeah. Age it up a little bit from the ending of this game. Sure. Yeah. It's not going to take place the day after. That's a good point.
No. Yeah. I would think she'd be in her 20s and probably looking for something, maybe picking up a loose end or something. I don't know, man. There's so many different directions it can go in, but we'll find out. But that's Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, available on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 and PC. So you can play it on all 3 of those platforms if you'd like. Please check it out. Dig, let's end this episode of KnockBack like we do each and every episode with a dad joke.
I got to tell you a story first. And this plays directly into dad joke because I can't tell you. I haven't told you this. I've been keeping this one safe for about 2 weeks, but I have to tell you this. Dad jokes. When dad jokes go wrong, okay? This was really an embarrassing moment for me. The most embarrassing thing that's happened to me in quite some time.
Really? Okay, wow.
Yeah. And this is when dad jokes go awry. So let me set it up for you. Helene and I go to a friend's birthday party. Friends in the neighborhood, a couple that we're both friends with. Helene's a little closer to the girl than I am to the guy, but they're nice people, friends. Helene's like, it's Jim's birthday party tonight. We're going to go over to that birthday party right in the adjoining neighborhood, not far. He's turning 43, so they're a little younger than us, about 5 years younger than us. So go over, get to the house, downstairs, nice house, nice finished basement with the full bar down there, pool table and everything. Jim's behind the bar. The birthday boy, the host, is behind the bar. Give him a pound, give him his presents. How you doing? Get a beer. And he's talking to a girl. He's behind the bar. The girl's where I am, standing next to me on the other side of the bar. And I'm thinking it's a friend, it's a sister. I don't recognize her. But she looks around my age, maybe Jim's age. The youngest Jim's age, right? So I make the charming remark of, oh, happy birthday. You don't look a day over 27. And Jim's like, oh, it's so, introduces me to the girl. Oh, it's such and such's birthday too. We were born on the same day. And they look about the same age to me. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You guys don't look an age over a day over 27. She's like, I just turned 26. Yep. I just fucking got there. It was awful. Helene, I guess, wasn't within earshot when I said it, when I made this gaffe. And I told her later on, she's like, she had to be kidding. But I just know, thinking back, putting myself in that time and place, she wasn't. Like, just the attitude, the mannerism, she wasn't angry. In fact, I'm not even 100% sure she got the joke, but she definitely wasn't kidding. Dude, I've never felt a bigger shoe in my mouth. It was, and then I realized you got to be so careful doing things like that. You know what I mean? You have to be, but usually, like, I'm right on with that. Like, this girl looked like she was 15 years older than 26.
She looked like an old catcher's mitt.
I'm not even being mean, but I never would have made that joke if he was going to be younger than the age I'm joking about. So, yeah. So, all right. I'll leave you guys with that. You guys could laugh at me all you want for that. Now,
glad you got that
joke.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me cleanse. James Ketchum, our pal. Okay, Kyle. My coworkers always laugh at my jokes in our in-person meetings, but never in our online meetings. When I asked them why, they said that my jokes weren't remotely funny.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good
I
one.
really like this one.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
Very good. Thank you for that.
And timely.
And very timely, indeed. Well, thank you for that. Sorry about your faux pas. I don't think it's that bad. I think it's entirely possible she was kidding too. If she really looked that old, it's not 1980 anymore where we marvel about. It's like this woman's 22 years old. I'm like, she looks like she's 45. Like, what is going on? What are you talking about? It's different now. So
it's very different now. It's
so
true.
Maybe she added a little layer to the joke you didn't catch. I don't know. I wouldn't beat yourself up too bad. Was it awkward after that? For any reason?
It was awkward for me because you know what? Because her reaction was dubious, but Jim was there. He looked like he was sorry for me. I'm thinking like if they were super close friends that we saw all the time, would it be worse? Or is it worse that they're kind of periphery friends that we're not that comfortable with, but at least we don't have to see a lot? I'm trying to figure that out, but I'm not even sure what the answer is there. You know what I mean? Like either way, it was pretty bad.
Yeah,
it was hard to live down.
You'll find out if you're invited to the next event.
That's true. That's a good point.
Soiree.
That'll be the tell.
All right. Well, thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand Media, KnockBack, etc. You can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia, early ad-free access to every episode of this show and all of our shows. And name in the credits, Q&As, all the rest. We couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.